ask me questions. And just before I do that, I'll just give you a forecast of what I'd like to do today. I'd like to answer your questions. I'd like to say a little bit more about Book 1, probably along the way of answering your questions. And then when we're done with that, I'll get into Book 2 before the break, and then Book 3 after the break. That's the plan at any rate. It'll be a lot, but it's the only way we have any hope of finishing the Republic by the end, which is a noble goal, because as I was saying, I think every book is valuable in its own right, but it makes a whole. And it's not until you step back and see the whole that you really see what he was doing all along.
今日は午前中、前半に2巻ですね、2巻、それから午後に後半に3巻がありますけれども、これ結構たくさん内容詰まってると思うんですけども、でもやっぱり本全体を読むっていうことで、その一冊の本が語っている哲学っていうものが理解できるかなと思うので、できるだけこの全て上下巻全部いきたいと思いますので、ちょっとこのスピードでやってみていきますということです。
Okay, so I'll begin by taking your question. But first of all, I don't recognize you. What is your name? How do I spell that?
Tai.
T-A-I.
Tai. Oh, that's easy. Okay, nice to meet you. Okay, so any questions about Book 1? We spent the first half of last class talking only about the first page, and then we spent the second half with a summary of the rest of Book 1. And a lot happens in Book 1, so my hope is you'll have questions. It's okay if you don't. I'll give a very quick summary, but I want to always give you the chance to ask questions from the beginning.
Just for the Book 1.
Yes. Yes. Okay. And the idea is that you would come with a question. It's okay to ask whatever occurs to you, but this time would be for questions that you've meditated on, that have concerned you in the meantime. But ask any question at any time.
疑問があったら別でも言ってもらえたらいいです。今ちょっと聞いてみたのは、前回から今日にかけて家に持って帰って考えてもらったことがあったらちょっと言ってもらいたいなと思ったんですけども、一つでなければ進みたいと思います。
Okay. Well, if there are no questions, let me make a point that I made last time very quickly. Let me make it more deliberately this time.
前回のサマリーを。
This is a point that happens in the debate between Thrasymachus and Socrates. It's the last point that they make between each other, and it's the most important point in all of Book 1. And so we did it too quickly. We need to slow down on this point.
はい、ソクラテスとセレカスの間で起こったこと、これが一番大事なところなので、そこのところで話したいと思います。
You'll recall that a lot of Book 1 presumed this notion of craft, skill, expertise. You could even say science. The word is techne. Just to see how much got through, what does that mean to you, techne?
ここに書いてテクネってことについて前回かなりやったと思うんですけども、これについて皆さんが持っているイメージなり考えなり何かあれば言ってください。
When I say what does it mean to you, I don't mean personally. I mean, what did you learn that Socrates means when he uses that word? Because we want to all agree about the meaning of that word as we go forward.
このソクラテスがこのテクネについてどのように言っているかということを皆さんがどのように理解したかについてを言ってください。
Justice is perhaps an example, just as medicine is an example. It's one technique. Another might be mathematics. Another might be business. Another might be public relations. Another might be political science. Others include carpentry, horsemanship, sailing, and on and on and on and on and on. Many, 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 many.
これらここの数字全部言わないんですけど、ここに書いてもらったものすべてが、このテクネに含まれている。
So you're right that book 1 presupposes that justice is a techne. But what I'm asking here is, what is a techne, according to Socrates, so that we can appreciate what's happening in book 1 when he uses this as an example of a techne. What is a techne?
今ちょっと聞きたいのは、その、例として挙げたことではなくて、そのテクネそのものは一体何なのか、どのように皆さんが理解されたか。
はい。As you said, technique is expertise and expertise.
Yeah, so these are
Yeah,
English translations of techne.
yeah, and these are all different, like such as business technique, expertise, public relations expertise, horsemanship expertise, whatever.
Yeah.
These are different,
Yes.
and I don't know. Every single expert has every single different expertise.
Yes, but what is an expertise?
Okay.
何さんでしたっけ？
スンヤ
シュンヤです。
スンヤさん。
シュンヤです。
シュンヤさん。シュンヤさん、もしも英語で言わはったときは、日本語でちょっと言ってもらえたら分かりやすいけど、何を質問されたのか。
一言で
質問というか、答えられたこと。
テクネは、まあ、みんな違うよねっていう。
みんな違うよね。
So-
だからテクネは何だって。
It's as if I asked you, what is a book? And you said, well, there are different books. There's a book like this, there's a book in Japanese, there's a book in Greek, there's a book in English. That's true, but I'm asking, what is a book? What is the, remember we did this last time? What it is? We don't say that in English. That's a very strange English expression. That's a direct translation of the Greek. But in Latin, the verb to be is esse, and essentia is a word that Cicero made up to translate this. And so it comes into English as essence. So maybe, what's the Japanese word for essence?
エッセンス。本質か。
Okay? So what I'm asking you is, what is the essence of a book? What makes a book? A book, and not a jug, not a pen, and so on. That's an interesting question in its own. But I'm asking more particularly, what is the essence of a techne? What makes a techne a techne?
今のは分かりますかね。
テクネ is テクネ。
You're right! I'll give you a hint. These are bodies of knowledge. We say in English, body of knowledge, area of knowledge, and you're right. This is an area of knowledge that studies how to make money. This is an area of knowledge that studies how to get people to like you, like advertising. This is a body of knowledge that studies how to get power. This is a body of knowledge that studies how to get healthy. This is a body of knowledge that studies, calculation, whatever. So they're all types of knowledge. So when I ask you what is the essence of expertise, I'm really asking you what is the essence of knowledge? What is it that makes knowledge knowledge? As opposed to opinion or belief or faith.
このテクネを you're saying that techne is a body of knowledge.
Each techne is a body of knowledge. Mm-hmm.
これそれぞれ一個一個挙げてもらったような例えば医学であったりしたら、全ては、知識の体系を、表しているわけですけれども、それ、I lost.
That's okay. I'm asking you, what is techne?
Yes.
What is the essence of techne? And now I gave you a clue. I said techne is just knowledge.
Okay.
So I'm asking you, what is knowledge? Say versus belief.
例えばじゃあ知識っていうものは何なのか、知識とこの体系とテクニっていうのはほとんどニアリーイコールなんですけれども、それに対してじゃあ知識って考えてみたら知識って一体何だろう。
I'll give you another clip.
どうだろう。それは例えば信仰であったりとか意見であったりとかものとは、知識が違うものですよね。じゃあ知識は何なんでしょうか。
Okay. Miyamoto, do you remember last class you were sitting here and I said, you have a pain. He had a pain in his abdomen, stomach, belly. Yeah. And I said, I'm no doctor. I don't have the expertise of medicine. I believe you had spicy food for lunch.
多分、お腹痛いんだけどって、でも私は一緒じゃないからよくわからないけど、多分なんかちょっと辛いものでも食べたんじゃないと言ったとします。
But I was wrong.
でもそうじゃなかった。
People who are not experts are often wrong.
その道に通じている人じゃなかったら、大体答えていることっていうのは間違っていることが多いですよね。
But experts, of course they're human. They make mistakes occasionally. But what makes them an expert? It's that they have knowledge. And when you have knowledge, you are never what?
専門家っていうものは、間違えることもありますけれども、その知識に対してはとても通じているわけですよね。ということは、you're saying the knowledge?
Yeah. When I have belief or opinion, I can be wrong. But when I have knowledge, I'll just say it now. I'm never wrong. Do they understand?
I think so. 今わかりました。オピニオンとか意見だとか何かそういうものは間違っている可能性があるけども、知識というものをしっかり持っていたら間違うことは絶対ありえない。
Let me show you an example of what I mean. So here's Miyamoto with his pain. This is what's really going on.
お腹痛い人がいてます。で、実際残っていることがその右のくにゃくにゃです。
Here's Patrick Sensei, who has an idea, bad food.
で、パトリック先生は、もちろんエキスパートじゃないわけですけども、なんか悪いもの食べたんでしょって言います。
That's my belief. That's my opinion.
それは私の単なる意見と思ったことです。
But I'm wrong.
でもそうじゃない。
Because what's really wrong? What's really going on with Miyamoto?
宮本さんに実際起こっていることは何なんでしょう。
You probably don't remember the English word. Appendicitis. A common, very serious problem that's very easily fixed. Children get this problem. They get it removed.
盲腸かな。Appendicitis is kind of a disease that you have to, when you go out, you have to take that away.
Yes, exactly.
多分盲腸だと思われます。調べてみて。I'm not very sure.
Yeah, well, let's not spend time on
それは
appendicitis.
そんな重要なことで単な
The
る
point
理由
is,
なんで。
you have a disease, and I am not an expert. I have an opinion or a belief about what's wrong, what's really, and I'm wrong.
私はエキスパートじゃない、その専門家じゃなくて、でも意見を持ってる。でもその意見はもちろん間違っている。
But if I were a doctor,
でももし失礼者だったら、
what would my opinion be?
私の意見はどんなものになるでしょう。
I would go up to Miyamoto and I would touch him and I would say, does it hurt here? No. Does it hurt here? No. Does it hurt here? Ah! Oh, I know your problem is, what would I say?
なんて言うでしょう。彼は正しい。He says right.
I would be correct. Appendicitis. In my mind, it would seem to me the way it really is.
この医者としての私の中ではそれが一体実際に何なのかということがもうきちんと分かっている。
That's what knowledge is.
それが知識っていうものです。
There's an appearance in my mind, and there's a reality. And if I'm an expert, the appearance and the reality are the same.
その現実と、現実のように見えるものっていうものとか、もしも私が専門家であった場合はそれは一致するわけです。専門家でなければそれが異なっていることが往々にしてあるということで。
Here's the simple summary. The expert sees the world the way it is.
この専門家というものは世の中にあるもの、世界をそのままのありようで捉えることができる人たちのことです。
The non-expert sometimes sees it the way it is, sometimes doesn't, because the non-expert has belief or opinion, which is somewhat random. Knowledge always sees things the way they are.
専門家じゃない人たちの物事を見るときには、もちろん合ってる時もあるし、合ってないこともありますので、それがはっきりとはしないわけですけれども、専門家である人はそれが知識に裏付けられているので間違うことがありません。
Okay? Everyone clear? Now I'm going to ask you the question again, which was, well, I asked you the question, what is techne?
で、同じような形で、じゃあこのテクネって何ですかと尋ねたいのです。
Techne is seeing things the way they are in a particular domain.
テクネというのが物事をそのあるがままに見るということですね。What do you say in
In a particular domain.
特定の分野において。
The doctor sees the way things are in health.
医者の場合だったらその患者の健康に関して。
The mathematician sees things the way they are in numbers.
数学者であればその数の世界をそのままのありようで捉えることができる。
If there is a techne of justice, the just person sees things the way they are in human relationships.
もしも正義のテクネというものがあるんだとしたら、その人間の関係性の中で、正義というものがどのように現れているのかをきちっと見て取ることができる。
And if there are expertise in these things, then these things must see the way things really are in those domains.
なので、もしそういうテクネのいろんな種類がありますけれども、そのいろんな種類の中でそれぞれの分野でそれぞれの人たちがその分野における世界ありようを全て見て取ることができる。
Before we talk about those, which is the point, is everyone clear on, say, medicine or mathematics, how their techni, expertises, and what that means?
今のところでとりあえずこの例えば医学だったり数学だったりというところで、テクネというものが何を意味しているのかというのは分かっていただけましたか？
Okay. So when I'm a mathematician, when I start as a student, I only have belief and opinion about numbers.
私が学生で、数学について学び始める若いの時は、いわば初期の段階はああいうなんていうかな、わけわからないいろんなアイデアを持ってただけだったんですけど。
Then I go to Doshisha, to the Department of Mathematics, and I study mathematics. What does the teacher give me?
で、私が同志大学行って数学科で数学を学ぶんだとします。そしたら一体その先生は、私に一体何を教えてくれたことになるんでしょう？
Knowledge,
もちろん知識ですよね。
which means I see numbers the way they are.
私はその数字というものを、そのままのありようで見ることができるようになったと。
Okay. Now, Thrasymachus, the sophist, he thinks there are crafts or expertises, techni, of these things.
ソフィストである、これなんだっけ、トラシマコスは、そう、ごめんなさい、
Thrasymachus thinks there are crafts, skills, expertises, techni, of these things.
は、そのここに挙げているような諸々の分野のテクネというものを持っています。知ってます。
Last class, we dealt with all of the intricate labyrinth of how we got to the point where he says he believes in these things. And we don't have time to redo that. If you have a question, we can. But let's just focus on his thought that there is a craft of these things.
このトラシマックスがその彼が信じていることをいうことをいろいろと前回の授業で保ってずっと追ってきたわけですけれども、今は now we're going to do what?
We're going to ask, as Socrates does, are there expertises of these things?
ソクラテスはこのそれぞれの分野において実際に専門家っていうものがいるのかどうか。
You're asking that whether that there is actual experts in each area?
In these things.
So that is Socrates' asking.
Is there an expertise of making money? Is there an expertise of getting people to like you?
That is his
Is there an
question.
expertise of getting power?
His question. That is his
That is Socrates' question.
ソクラテスが尋ねているのは、例えばこの金融の分野での専門家だったりとか、なんだっけ、パブリックリレーションの政治の分野での専門家だったりっていうのが本当に存在するのかっていうことを尋ねています。
Thrasymachus thinks yes.
プラシマクスはそういると思っています。
That's his whole career. He's a sophist. He goes from town to town, especially Athens, where the money and the power and the status are, and he teaches young men how to get these things.
実際ソフィストであるプラシマクスがアテネの町でやっていることはそれそのもので、それぞれの分野についていろんなことを若い人たちに教えるということを彼自身がやっています。
The sophist is an expert in getting these things. That's what Thrasymachus thinks.
トラシマクスが信じているのはこのソフィストっていうものは、そういういろんなテクニック、お金や何々、もろもろのことが理解するテクニックを、知っていてそれを教える人のことだと思っている。
Okay. Socrates, most people agree nowadays. Presumably Doshisha agrees because there's probably a school of business where you go and become an expert in this. There's probably a department of political science where you go and become an expert. And there's probably something like public relations where you go and become an expert.
で今の現在の世界の中でもそれが実際信じられています。だから私たちは同志社大学の数学科なり政治学科なり行ってその政治について学ぶというようなことをしているわけです。
Socrates thinks, no, there is no expertise in these things.
ソクラテスはそうは思わない。そういうことに関する、専門家なるものっていうのは存在しないと思っている。
Here's why.
何かっていうと
The expertise of medicine has something real that it's a body of knowledge about. Mathematics, numbers, something real that it's about. Carpentry, something real that it's about. Wood. Horsemanship, something real that it's about. Horses. Sailing, something real that it's about. The wind. Boats, etc., etc. Every expertise is knowledge about something real.
That's what Socrates thinks.
That's what Socrates thinks. But there's nothing real here.
ソクラテスが思っているのは例えば馬術師がいたとしたら、馬についてのことでもその馬のそのものについてのことの、知識を持つことが本当の、ソクラテスが思うところの知識っていいですかね、馬術師の場合は。で、政治に関してだったら、例を忘れてしまったけども、なのでそれはソフィストの言うところのこのなんて言ったらいいの、馬に関するソフィストの思ってる知識とは違う。どういう言い方したらいいのかちょっと言ってください。
リアルなものについては成り立つわけよ。
目の前にある場合は
ビジネスとかあっちの方がリアルなものが相手に
学問になってしまうとダメってことですよね。
でも多分リアルがもう単純にリアルじゃない。
リアルじゃない。
リアルじゃないって言ってるだけか。
実在しないという意味だ。実在を相手にすると知識は成り立つけど、
はい、じゃなかったら
あっちの
単なる
フ
フェイクであると。
あそこの3つは別に実在を相手にしてないので知識にならないので。
That's what Socrates believes. I haven't given you why he believes that, but I wanted to be clear about what he's claiming. So it's clear what he's claiming. So now let's spend 10 minutes and investigate why he thinks there's nothing real here. I think he's right. So I'll say this in my own voice. And in fact, can you stop the camera, please? Is that okay?
ちょっとカメラを止めてもらうのって OK ですか？
And
You read what?
Marx.
Marx, sure.
Yeah. And I remember there was
If I
a,
may, Thrasymachus is a lot like Marx. But go ahead, so you're right on track.
there's a concept of the exchange in the Marx theory, right?
Exchange value
Yeah,
versus
exchange
use
value.
value.
Use value.
Yes.
So what pops into my mind right
Yes.
now, the difference between
Yeah.
exchange value
Yeah.
and the use value.
Yeah,
So, and use value here is more like craft or technique that you mentioned
yeah,
right
yeah.
now.
It seems like that. It's a very good distinction, if that helps you understand this. Yeah, yeah.
ね、
日本語
なんかマルクスにもなんかその交換価値と使用価値っていう違いが区別があってで僕も簡単にもう説明させてもらいますけどその交換価値は言ったらなんかその今パトリックが言ってたようなそのなんか社会とかその文化とかそれによってなんか構築されてくるなんかそのなんていうかあるの本当にあるのかないのかわからないような価値っていうもので使用価値の方はどちらかというとその僕の理解ではこういうクラフトとかその農業してもう実際物を作るとかなんていうか労働するというかでそれだから交換価値っていうのはなんかその使用価値いわゆる実際に物を作るとか実際に何か製造したりとかそういうとこからなんかに付加価値をなんかいろいろ加算していく中で出来上がってくるなんか非常に貨幣とかまさにそうですけど何かなんかそのものというそれと何か関係あるのかということを聞きました。
Well, I didn't understand a word of that, so
No,
right?
that's translation of what you just said.
Oh, okay. I thought you were just talking about Marx.
No.
Can I say first why it's so intuitive to bring up Marx at this point? I think it will be helpful for people. So, Marx thought that every society has a ruling class and the ruled. Now, that's not Marx, that's just true. There's always the ruling class and those who are ruled.
どの社会でも支配層と非支配層がいます。
And in capitalism, the rich rule and the poor are ruled.
資本主義の世界においては金持ちの人たちが私たちをいわば支配していることになります。
But there are only two ways to maintain that structure.
でも2つの方法でしかこのような構造を保つことはできません。
One is by force,
一つは力による。
but that won't work in the long run because if there are only a few rich people and many poor, the many poor can overwhelm the rich.
もちろんそれは長くは続きませんというのはやっぱり貧しい人の数が多ければ、数の少ない支配層の人たちをいずれはやっつけてしまうことができるからです。
So the only sustainable model for capitalism is if the rich get the poor to cooperate willingly.
その資本主義という世界の理由が続いていくことができるのは、お金を持っている人たちが、貧しい人たちが、自分から進んでこのような世界を保つようにしていくことができること。
And the way Marx thought that the rich get the poor to cooperate willingly is by tricking them with religion.
で、このお金を持っている人たちが、貧しい人たちが、自分から進んでこの世界のありように貢献していくことが可能にしていくのは、いわばある種の宗教的な要素というものが必要になってきます。
The religion is not real, it's just an appearance.
で、この宗教的っていうものは、つまりこの見かけのことです。
An appearance of
本当
what?
ではありません。
Obviously an appearance of God, but God could say anything. That's not enough. It's an appearance of what?
それは何の神様ということはできますけど、みたいなどういう見かけなんでしょうか。
I'll give you a hint. If you say, give me this, I'll say, no, it's mine. You could force me, you could grab it, but as I said, that won't work for the rich because there are too few of them and too many poor people. You'll only get this from me if you can convince me of something, if you can make it seem to me a certain way. What is it that you have to trick me into believing? to get this out of my hand, willingly.
You're the rich one.
I was doing two things at once.
Sorry.
Forget about rich and poor, that's what Marx is ultimately explaining.
Yeah.
I'm just doing a little example.
Okay.
Never mind rich and poor. I'm rich in the sense that I have this. But forget about it. He wants this.
単純にとにかく俊也さんはこのお金を欲しいです、パトリックさんから。
He can say, give it to me.
くれということで言いますよね。
And I'll say, no.
私は嫌と言います。
He could then grab it and use force.
で俊也さんは力ずくでそれを取ること。
That may work. But now we'll switch back up. It won't work for the rich because there are too few of them. They can't go out and grab everything from the poor. There are too many poor people. And if the rich treat them that way, they'll resist.
で、お金持ちの人たちっていうのはもちろん数が少ないんですけれども、彼らがお金を得るために貧しい人たちのところに行ってその全部お金を取り上げていくってことはもちろんできませんっていうのは、貧しい人たちの数が多いのでそれによって抵抗されてしまうということが言えるからです。
So the rich have to trick the poor into giving their money willingly.
なのでお金持ちの人たちがしなければいけないのは貧しい人たちが自分の意思で
And the
喜ん
trick,
でお
I'm
金を
sorry,
くれるっていうことです。
the trick is called religion, but don't use a word to substitute for thinking. What do we mean by religion? God, of course, but more specifically what?
ある種の難しいね、宗教という言葉を使ってるんですけど、宗教を何か使ってるんですが、それは一体何なのか、別の言葉で。So you want them to think the other way of saying religion in this situation?
Let's just forget about religion.
Yeah,
I'll come back to it. That's why I realized it wasn't working. So I was saying, let's just do it in this example.
Okay.
He says, go ahead, say give me.
You mean?
No. So what can you do first?
Yeah.
You can grab it.
Yeah.
I'll resist you, I'll fight you, maybe you'll win, maybe I'll win. It will depend on who's stronger. Remember Thrasymachus's definition, the advantage of the stronger? And Socrates made fun of him and he said, are you saying 10 pounds of beef for the wrestler? And Thrasymachus got upset and said, you're just playing games. And it was kind of funny and he was kind of insulting him. But the point was to emphasize, we're not talking about force. We're talking about persuasion. Do you remember at the beginning? When the first page? Yes, exactly, the first page. Persuasion only works if you'll listen to me. So, you have to persuade me to give this to you. What's the trick? How can you persuade me to give this to you?
力ずくで取るのではなくて、その説得するっていうことをその気にさせるために何をしたらいいでしょう。
It's like putting additional value on the
Yeah.
yen.
Well, I have a value on the yen too. We agree about that, and I'm saying it's my value. What can you say that will mean I'll go, yeah, you're right. Okay, fine. What do you have to say to me? What do you have to get me to believe? What appearance do I have to have in my mind so that I willingly give up my money?
なんとかお金を渡すことが望ましいことである、やるべきことであるということを示す。それがいいことであると信じ込ます。だからさっきゆりちゃんが入ってきたんじゃないですか。
まあなんか説得せな説得な
One word.
She was trying to say that word, that you have to make them believe that it is worth doing.
Worth doing? What do you mean worth doing?
Maybe it's not her word.
That's okay. You're very close to what I'm looking for. Once you see this word, it will all fall into place.
Rule or standard or
Well, I'm a rude guy. I'm going to keep it.
legal statements.
Ah. Keep going.
Yeah.
It could be legal, but it doesn't have to be. Let's say we're friends and we don't need to get the law involved. What can you say so that I'll be like, yeah, okay, it's yours.
I have idea. So you have to pay tax.
Well, that's ultimately politically what we're talking about. But I'm trying to illustrate that with a very simple example. He can just think about when you say to a friend, well, you don't say, give me, and you don't grab it, but you do say,
To rent?
well, if he just wanted me to lend him, that would be fine. So that's a good point. But okay, let's say he, oh, here. I lend it to him,
Yes.
and now it's been a month, and I say, well, I could say gimme, or I could grab it, but instead, what do I say?
I'm supposed to have that one.
Supposed to. You're getting very close. What does that mean, supposed to?
ちょっと日本語できるもらえますか。
これは私が所有することになっています。
I just asked him to just
Oh,
Yeah.
what, so,
say what he said in Japanese. so-
Okay. yes. Okay.
That's what she said as well.
Yeah, and now I'm saying, you're very close, you're very close. Supposed to, I don't know the Japanese, of course, but I suppose, you suppose, blah, 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 that's the verb. That means I think. So, I am supposed to, you said, I am supposed to give it back.
Mm.
That's a way of hiding who's doing the supposing. Oh, I'm supposing. What am I supposing? What's in my mind? What is the appearance? What do I think? And you agree, presumably if we're friends. I think,
Do you think?
what?
I think what you think.
What is it that we think about that? That bill.
Piece of paper.
Yeah, but, I mean, we agree about that, but when it comes time, a month now, and you haven't paid me, it's not really relevant that it's a piece of paper. What's relevant is you're supposed to give it to me. And I'm saying you're very, very close, but you're not yet hitting the nail on the head.
Like contract.
Yeah? You're getting close. You're orbiting it.
Should.
You should. Oh, those are great words. You should give it to me. You're supposed to give it to me. You're contractually obligated to give it to me. It is what that you give it to me? What's the one word that hits the nail on the head? If I don't give it, if you don't give it back to me, and you just say, no, I'm going to keep it, then you are vicious. You have a vice. What is the vice?
Responsibility. Responsibility.
So he is not responsible, but there are different ways to not be responsible. I cannot be responsible by not showing up for my class, by teaching it poorly, and so on. But there's a particular responsibility that people who have things that belong to other people have to give them back when it's time. Think of Cephalus, his definition of justice. Oh, I just gave it away. It's justice.
Just.
Justice. It's just to give it back to me. Are you going to be unjust?
I don't think it's justice. I'm gonna hold this.
Oh, well, well, that's when the law will get involved, if it's more than 1,000 yen. Okay, this was just a small example. Do you want to talk about the example before I apply it back to Marx, which was the point?
I think that's
Okay,
マルクスの方に行っていいですかね。
in case I don't forget. What Marx thought was that, to repeat, the poor have to willingly give their money to the rich, taxes. The rich have to trick the poor into thinking it is what to do so.
Justice.
It is justice. It is just. Paying your taxes is just. So when the poor farmer has only one of these, and his children are hungry, but the tax collector comes to his prefecture and says, you owe us 1,000 yen, he thinks, I better give the 1,000 yen, otherwise I'm unjust. And if there's a religious component, as there is in Christianity, then God will be angry with me. So that's why I brought up religion. Marx famously says, religion is the opiate. You familiar with this?
Yeah.
of the masses. Opium, you're familiar with the drug opium?
I can. I can.
Religion is what the rich create to trick the poor into giving up their money, into giving their respect, into giving up power. So obedience, respect, taxes. That's Marx. I think it's very interesting, but if nothing else, I want to get to your use value and exchange value. This was a whole tangent. But the reason I brought it up is you've seen this view before. Marx didn't invent it. This is the view that justice, or religion, is what the powerful do, or the stronger do, to the ruled. For what purpose? In capitalism, the rich rule the poor. Why do the rich, who are the stronger, trick the poor into believing in God? A God that tells them it's just to pay your taxes. Why do they do that? Is it because they're religious?
To keep themselves powerful.
Exactly. And so if you were to summarize that whole view about justice, justice is what? 4 words. 2 big ones and then 2 prepositions. I'll give you a hint. Justice is the advantage of the powerful. The powerful, the stronger. That's Thrasymachus' definition of justice. Marx is just elaborating Thrasymachus for capitalism. And if Thrasymachus is wrong, which is what Socrates is arguing, then Marx is wrong. So I think Marx is a very interesting philosopher, has all sorts of good ideas, but overall it's false. It's a false philosophy. And its fundamental errors are the errors of Thrasymachus. So, for example, now we'll get back to your point. Let me erase some things. This is Marx now. Use value and exchange value. Okay. This has what as an exchange value? 1,000 yen. Currency always has the exchange value of what it says. What's its use value? If you're on a desert island, what use is this to you? None. So that's the peculiar thing about money. No use value, and yet exchange value. That is to say, you can use it to exchange for things. But in itself, it has no value at all. And I think that's why you were thinking of when I was saying it has an appearance but no reality. Oh, wait.
Like,
Oh, yeah. If I go to Alabama and I want to buy your iPhone and I say, terrific, here, are you going to sell it to me for this? No, because this doesn't appear to you as valuable. You look at that like it's a piece of paper from some country I've never been to. It has no value to me. But if I can persuade you that you can go down to the bank and exchange this for $1 million, are you going to sell me the iPhone?
If I'm convinced, yes.
If you're convinced. What if I were very good at convincing people that things have high exchange values? What would I become very quickly?
putting the justice.
What's that?
Justice. You know.
Let's put justice aside for a moment. I'm not saying you're wrong. There's a really simple answer. If I was very good at tricking people into thinking things had very high exchange value, or even very high use value, when in fact they don't have either, what could I become very quickly?
Businessman.
Rich. I would become very good at making money.
Sorry.
今聞けましたね。この人が例えば使用価値、このお金というものに関する、交換価値で使用価値なりにその説明するのに長けていたとしたら、それに関して、説得的に他の人に言うことができて、結局のところその人がどんどんリッチお金持ちになっていくことができるっていう感じでいいですかね。
You can turn that back on, I forgot.
もしかし
Is
て
it on?
いいですか？大丈夫です
It's
か？
on?
はい
カメラ
カメラを戻してもらって大丈夫です。
戻してみます。
It's on? Okay. For example, if someone were very good at marketing drugs, they could get rich marketing drugs without knowing anything about drugs. They would only need to be good at creating appearances in people's minds about the drugs.
薬についてそのものを何も知らなくてもその薬についてのイメージを、いろんな形で作り上げることができたら、お金持ちに売ることができます。
Okay. All right, so to summarize, the debate between Socrates and Thrasymachus comes down to this. Socrates has defined techne in a way that requires that there be a reality that it's about. But there is no reality here. So these are not expertises. Thrasymachus is a fake. The whole thing?
Yeah, just for
Yeah.
one thing.
So Socrates defines techne, or expertise,
ソクラティスはテクネについて定義をしてくれました。
as body of knowledge,
知識の体系として。
and knowledge is about reality.
この知識っていうのは現実のことです。
You can have beliefs and opinions that are just appearances,
いろんなこの技術についての意見だったりとか、もろもろの考えというものを、持つことはできますけれども、それは単なる見かけです。
but to reliably see reality, you need to have knowledge, which is techne.
でも本当の現実というものを、見るとしたら知識というものを持っていなくてはいけなくて、それがテクネに当たるわけです。
So if there's no reality,
もしも現実というものがないとすれば、
as is the case with money, status, and power,
お金とか地位とかということに関してはそうだと言えるんですけども、
there's no expertise.
そこには、エクスペティス
Craft, techne, skill.
テクネというものはありません。
And so what Socrates is saying to Thrasymachus is, you've come to town, you're charging young men a lot of money for your education,
でソクラテスが、トラシマコスに言ってるのは、トラシマコスさん、あなたは町に来て若い人たちに話をすることでたくさんのお金を取ってますよね。
but your education, what you're teaching, isn't about reality.
でもあなたが教えていることっていうのは本当の現実のことではないですよね。
It's just a collection of beliefs and opinions about appearances.
で教えてるのはそのトラシマコスさんの持っている、意見であったり、この心情であったりすることで、つまりお見かけに過ぎないわけですよね。
Do you remember the cave? Just draw it very quickly.
今洞窟を思い出してください。
These are the prisoners. Whom do they represent? Us.
私たちです。
Whom do the puppeteers represent?
Fake teacher.
Fake teachers. And what do fake teachers do? They project appearances. We'll sometimes call those images. And the prisoners take on those images as if they're real. Now imagine one of these puppeteers breaks rank and he comes down and he loosens one of the prisoners and he says, "Come with me. I want to show you how it's done." That's what Thrasymachus is doing. He's saying, everybody's living in a fake world. We make it for them. I'm going to teach you how to be one of the powerful, rich, honored people who makes reality for the rest of the world. Did you want to translate that? I can keep going.
Sorry. まあ、今の話っていうのが、まあ、そのまま洞窟の話に当てはまっているっていう話ですけども、大丈夫ですか？全部言えるかどうかわからないですけど。
Okay. So that's Thrasymachus. This is us, or the people who are in the dialogue, like Glaucon, Adimantus, etc. Somebody comes down from reality. Who's that? Socrates. Socrates comes down and he stands next to Thrasymachus, and Thrasymachus is saying, look, justice is the advantage of the stronger. In other words, it's how to create an ideology, a religion, a fake morality, so you can be powerful, honored, and rich. And Socrates says, but that's not real. All you're doing is going from images to models. There's no reality there. You can become very good at it. Obviously, Thrasymachus is good at it. So good that Marx, 2,400 years later, is just repeating his idea. But Socrates is saying, how about going all the way? How about going to reality and leaving the cave behind? And if that's fake education, what's that? You don't have to believe it, but what is Plato presenting it as? Real education. So that's the drama of Book 1. It's presenting two models of education.
ということで、第1巻のサマリーですけども、まあ、2つのタイプの教育っていうものがソクラテスのように、実際のリアルな世界からやってきて教えてくれる人と、トラシマクソのように、まあ、操りリングを使って教えてる人というのが2つの教育のありようです。
Any questions about it? I have one more thing to say about it, but now would be a time to answer any questions.
何かちょっと分かりにくいところがあったら言ってください。
So can I categorize the techne Socrates mentions, Plato mentions,
Yes.
as the use value the Marx mentions, kind of like that? So
Let me try first in his own terms. So Socrates, so there's a person and there's a techne. And I'm going to put in quotation marks because Socrates in the end is saying Thrasymachus doesn't even have one. Expertise. Thrasymachus. Sophistry. That's what you Thrasymachus claim. It's a way to get money, status, and power. But Socrates says it's not a real technique. It's just circulating appearances and images. As I said, if someone were a marketer of drugs, they wouldn't have to know anything about drugs. They just have to know how drugs seem to people and how you could shift the way they seem so that they buy them. Socrates' expertise is called philosophy. And what is that? That's the love of wisdom. What is wisdom? Knowledge, a certain kind of knowledge. And what is knowledge about? Reality. Whereas these are about appearances. So you're clear on what Plato thinks, and then there's a question about Marx. Yeah.
Am I confused with Marx use value?
I think you're okay. I'll tell you what the big flaw in Marx is. As I say, it's the same flaw that's in the Sophists, which is Marx's distinction between use value and exchange value, which is fundamental to his whole economics, requires a distinction between appearance and reality. but he doesn't have a notion of what's real. Remember Protagoras, man is the measure of all things? If you're going with this sophistic outlook, it's all just appearances. So to pause for 2 minutes on Marx, what actually is the use of something? This has use value to hold water. It also has use value to hit you on the head. What's its real use?
Right, yeah.
Plato has an answer. Plato thinks its real use is to drink. We talked about that before. It's to hold water.
Okay.
And he might be wrong, but that's his view, and he's got a whole understanding of reality to explain why that's true. Marx says no. Marx is an atomist. We talked about that very briefly. Epicurus is the famous atomist. Lucretius is the Roman. Democritus and Leucippus were the first. They think the world is just matter. Atoms in the void. Atoms in empty space. That's pretty much the worldview that you get if you study physics or chemistry, which goes back to this. Marx did a PhD in philosophy. He wrote his dissertation on Democritus and Leucippus. He was an atomist. If you're an atomist, you don't think there's any value in the world. You don't go to the chemistry department to find out, how should I live my life? It's not just that they don't think about that. There's nothing in their science that could possibly tell you how you should live your life. Because to them, the world is just elements in space. There's no meaning. That's Marx. And so when it comes to use value, there's no answer. It's all just appearances. I'll give you my favorite aphorism of Democritus. I'll write it out. Where's my eraser? Okay. In appearance, sweet. I'm paraphrasing. I mean, I might be getting the order of the words wrong. In appearance, sweet. In appearance, bitter. In appearance, hot. In appearance, cold. So he does it a few more times. In reality, atoms in the void. Let me give you an example. We won't actually do it, but if you were to put your finger into my water, what do you think it would be, hot or cold?
Cold.
Cold, because there's ice in there. But if I come from a freezing cold, like sub-nitrogen, room, and I put my finger in here, how would it feel to me? Warm. So in appearance to you, hot. In appearance to me, hot. In appearance to you, cold. And it's not just between people, it's for the same person at different times. Or how about we go to lunch, and I taste some food and I say, ooh, this is too sweet. And then you try it and you say, no, it's bitter. Is it actually sweet or actually bitter? It's neither. It's just atoms in the void. It's just certain chemical substances. And if they interact with your tongue in a way that makes you say, oh, this is too sweet, but they interact with my tongue in a way that makes me say, it's too bitter, well, it's sweet to you and it's bitter to me, but there's no truth about whether it's sweet or bitter. The only truth is atoms in the void. That's Marx's worldview. Materialism. These philosophers are, this is a contemporary of Socrates, this is a contemporary of Plato. Plato's totally aware of these people. The sophists are totally aware of these people. They're getting their views from them. They think that they go together. What the sophists are doing is applying this way of thinking about the world for stuff that people want. Because if the world has no justice in it, if it's just atoms in the void, you might as well make money. You might as well become king. You might as well get the respect of everybody. you might as well enjoy yourself. Which is why Epicureanism, the ancient philosophy, stressed pleasure. Because that's all we have in a world of atoms and void. There's no goodness or justice.
ちょっと、マルクスの話からは原子論とか唯物論の話をしました。あそこに書いてるのが原子論者の古代の人で、一番上ルクレティウスですね。エピクロス。エピクロスは今快楽主義者なんで今快楽の話をした。デモクリトスと一番下のルクレティウス。ちょっと読めない。すみません。という人たちですね。でマルクスはそういう考えをというかマルクスの博士論文自体がこのデモクリトスだったみたいな話をしてました。でアトムとインザボイドをどう訳したら無の空間というかな、空間の中にある原子だみたいな、だから暑いとか寒いとかいうそれは見せかけて本当は原子が動いてるに過ぎないみたいな、それが唯物論の考えだみたいな話をしてたと思います。
今その唯物論の世界においては正義っていうものは存在しない。
バリューそのものが唯物論はない。それはだから金儲けをするとかなんかそっちの方の話につながっていく。
もうついていくのですよ。
そのトラシマコスの話とそれはリンクしてるわけです。
So I'd like to make one more point about book one, and then I can always try to answer questions, but I want to make sure I make this point. So there's this fable. I'm not sure which culture. I think it might come from India. I don't know the text. I've tried to find out. Have you ever heard of this fable, the blind man and the elephant?
このインドのおとぎ話とされているものですけども、目の見えない人と象っていうそのインドのお話知ってますか？
Okay. Does it simple? I'll tell it to you. I don't know how to.
有名な話。
Okay. All right. With big ears. Okay. So, a man who can see, and I'll have him turn around. He sees that it's an elephant.
目の見える人が象を見てます。
He is the expert. He has knowledge. He sees.
彼はそれを象を見ることができるので、専門家であるわけです。知識を持ってます。
It's a real elephant, and when he thinks about it, this gets worse every time. Okay. He thinks about it, he has an appearance or an image, and it's the same. That's what makes him an expert. Okay?
で彼が持っているこの象のイメージっていうものは実際の象と同じなので、
Three blind men. What is it in Japanese?
3人の目の見えない人がやってきました。
The first, and the man with sight says, "Come and tell me what I have just brought into the room." Number one goes and grabs the leg, and he puts his arm around it, and he says, "It's a tree."
1人目の目の見えない人は象の足を掴んで、これは木だと言いました。
So he imagines it's a tree, and he thinks he's grabbing that trunk.
木の
That's his image. Number two comes here, and he grabs the trunk, and he thinks snake.
2人目の目の見えない人は鼻を掴んで、これは蛇だと言います。
Number three comes, he grabs the ear, and he thinks carpet.
耳を掴んだ人はカーペットだと言います。
What's interesting about this to me is that the expert can see reality.
面白いのはこの専門家である目の見える人は現実を見ることが
That's what we talked about for an hour.
それが今まで話したことです。
But here's the new thing. The expert can also see why the blind men have made the mistakes they've made.
まあ、目の見えない人たちがなんでそのように間違った考えを抱いたのか、それの理由を悟ることもできます。
Somebody tell Yoshi what I said because it's going to be important.
中川先生これご存知
先生、
ですか？
お話ご存知ですよね。
知ってます。
He knows the story.
Oh, good. Okay. This is like in the cave allegory, Socrates coming down into the cave. He can see reality. He knows that this is just a cave. But he can also see why the prisoners are making the mistakes that they're making. In fact, he can see why the prisoners are making the mistakes they're making. He can also see why the puppeteers are making the mistakes they're making.
これはもうそのまま今までの洞窟の話にも当てはまることで、まあ、洞窟の方に降りてきたソクラテス自身は、普通の人たちが間違った考えをなぜ抱いているのかっていうことも見ることができるし、またソフィストであるその、人形を操っている人たちがなぜ間違っているのかっていうことも全て見ることができます。
One more thing. That's Cephalus, that's Polemarchus, and that's Thrasymachus. Now, I'm not saying that Thrasymachus grabbed the trunk, it doesn't matter which one is which. My point is, once we see what justice really is, we can look back at Book 1 and we can not only see, oh, they made mistakes. That's something we should understand already because we spent Book 1 examining, well, what are their exact mistakes? But by the end, we should be able to see why they had to make those mistakes.
第一巻を通して、それぞれの人たちが、何か間違いを犯していることを見てきたわけですけれども、その間違いそのものについても知りましたけれども、それがなぜそのような間違いを起こしたのかというところも理解していなければなりません。
When you look at when you're the sighted man, you say, he had to think it was a snake because he grabbed the trunk. He had to think it was a tree because he grabbed the leg, or he had to think it was a carpet because he grabbed the ear. You see why they have to make those mistakes because of where they are and how things seem to them. So by the end of Republic, if we make it, I'm becoming doubtful we'll make it, but I'll keep the hope. By the end, when you look back at Book 1, you'll be able to see that not only Cephalus, Polemarchus, and Thrasymachus are wrong, but why they have to be wrong in those particular ways. Because justice always seems to someone based on her character. It's not like numbers, like math, where 2 plus 2 seems to you to be 4, 2 plus 2 to you seems to be 4, 2 plus 2 seems to you to be 4, and if it seems to you to be 5, you just made a mistake. It's not about being a bad person, you just learn more math. But when it comes to justice, people make the mistakes about justice that are symptomatic of their character flaws.
正義というものについて数学のように簡単にはいかないのは、それがその人自身のありようというものとも関わっているから。
So, for example, Cephalus made a mistake about justice. He was too preoccupied with money. Remember his definition of justice? Telling the truth in contracts and paying back what you owe? When he's asked a question about the value of human life and the role of justice in it, he just thinks about money. So he gives a businessman's definition of justice.
このキパスの場合は、お金のことが彼の頭を占めているので、全てのことをそのお金というもので見ていくということを、全てのごめんなさい、正義についてもそのお金というものを通して見ていくことになります。
When Polemarchus is asked what is justice, does anyone remember what he says?
ポレマコスについて覚えてますか？どのような物事を見ていたか。
Benefiting friends and harming enemies? He's a certain kind of man. And I told you when I introduced the characters, I wouldn't expect you to remember, but do you remember what happens to him about 10 years after this dialogue?
10年後何が起きたか彼に覚えてますか？
戦争してなんか殺されるんだよ。
He died.
He dies in battle. Yeah, the Civil War, exactly. He's a soldier. If you think of justice as benefiting your side and harming the other side, that's a soldier's way of thinking about justice.
彼は戦士の味方で正義というものを考えているということになります。
And Thrasymachus thinks of justice as the advantage of the stronger. We've talked a lot about that. Marx is a disciple, ultimately, of Thrasymachus. That's how a sophist thinks about justice.
それはソフィストの考え方に一緒だってことですかね。
どうも聞いてなくて。
はい、なるほど。
So as far as education is concerned, the reason why I wanted to stress this is if Socrates is a teacher, he can't just come in and tell people what justice is, because they already have beliefs about what justice is. It's like you can't go down to the bottom of the cave and stand behind people and just say, "It's a cave, don't believe it." It's going to sound like your voice is coming from the images. As a teacher, you have to see where the student is. And what this shows is you have to see what the character flaws of the student are. And you have to tailor what you say to those flaws.
ソクラテスが、洞窟に入ってきて、この洞窟にあることは全部間違ってるんだって叫んだだけでは何もそれぞれの人たちに届かなくて、それぞれの人たちがどのような性質を持ってどのような考え方をしているのかっていうのを理解した上で話さなくてはいけない。
That's all I had to say about book one. So now last chance for questions about book one. You can always ask any question you want, but now would be a good time to ask questions before we move on. We'll take a break after your questions.
ということまでとりあえず第1巻のサマリーをしたわけですけど、何かあれば。
I feel like I hope I understood the difference between use value and technique, and also I feel like education nowadays could be easily false education. That's what I thought.
Yes. Plato thinks education is almost always false. And I do think it's especially false now.
Makes sense.
And I think the reason why it's especially false, I mean, there are many reasons, but I think the reason especially why it's false now is because of technique. Not in his sense, in the sense of technology. Because what is technology allowing us to do? It's to become more efficient. This actually gets to use value. So I'll say this and then we'll break. Go back to Marx, use value. Well, we know what exchange value is. So what's use value?
That one?
What's that?
That one?
Anything. What's the general notion of use value?
Craft.
Well, I'll make it simple. So does this have a use value?
No.
No, except if you're cold and you have a match, it has a little bit of a use value. Does this have a use value? Yeah, because it has water. Marx's notion of use is what keeps you alive. But you could say to yourself, I would hope, is it just enough to be alive? Shouldn't we strive to be something while we're alive? What if that whole mentality of use value, namely things are valuable insofar as they keep us alive, fosters a society where people live under the illusion that life is just about living? That's what's happened in the 20th century, and that's when it really got going. Because what technology does is makes things more efficient. Efficient for what? Efficient for achieving great beauty? Never. Efficient for achieving great justice? No. Efficient for living. And it's become so intricate and so complicated, and we're so deep in that cave, that even to say efficient for beauty sounds so weird. It's just sort of assumed efficiency for living is what efficiency is. And so in America, I don't know in Japan, but in America, when educators have to justify to politicians and ultimately the rest of the country what it is that they do, it's always something horrible like adapting to society, training to get a job, becoming a good citizen, and so on. It's always be efficient for some empty goal.
It's the same.
It's the same. Yeah, I'm not surprised. I didn't want to presuppose, but basically, it's gone. The money, status, and power. That's what it's about. You know, we have universities that measure their success based on what percentage of their graduates get jobs and what the average income of their graduates is. And you could see it as how many of them become powerful and how powerful do they become. It's the same way of thinking. It's a sophistic model. It's a Thrasymachus model. It's a Marxist model of education. It's a materialist model of education. And it's gotten to the point where if you challenge it, you just sound like a crazy person. Which is like you're coming into the cave and saying, well, how about beauty? How about goodness? How about the soul? And the efficient administrators of the university look at you like you're crazy. Like you've come out of sunlight and you can't find your way in the darkness. Don't you know we have to satisfy these metrics? I don't know if that translates. If you run a school in America, a high school, a university, everything is quantified. So test results, average income of the graduates, everything has a number. And the administrators, the people who run our institutions in America, they're good at boosting the numbers. But they never ask, is it good to boost the numbers? Maybe it's good to lower the numbers. Or maybe just the numbers are irrelevant. That's a distraction from what we should really be doing.
ついていけてますか？教育にしろ何にしろ、
何でも数で測って数が上がればいいみたいな。
もう本当に数の世界、まあその有物論の世界で全てを決めてしまっているというか、教育ですらもだからそこのところにソクラテスのように入ってきて正義とはとか美だとかみたいなことを言っても当然もう跳ねのけられるというのか、全ては数で表せること、どれだけたくさんの人がこの大学どれぐらいたくさんの人卒業生がどれぐらいの収入を得ているのかということなんかを測ってその大学の価値を決めるみたいなことが起こっている。
And so that I wasn't misunderstood, the model in America is no more Marxist than it is capitalist. Those are just two sides of the same coin. Those are both materialist philosophies that seek efficiency. They have slightly different notions of how you achieve it and so on. One prefers more equality, one prefers more freedom and so on. But it's the same thing. And that exploded after the Industrial Revolution. And you think, what is the institution of the Industrial Revolution? Like what gets invented in the Industrial Revolution?
産業革命の良かったことって何でしょう？
A million inventions. But I mean, if you're an inventor in 1880 and you invent something, what then happens? That's different from when you invented something in 1200 or 1300.
その当時の時代に何か新しいものを発明したら一体何が起こったでしょう。それは今現在するのとは違うような構想を持っています。
Made things efficient.
And what made things efficient? Starting in the mid-19th century. By 1880, it's really rolling. And we're living in this era still. There's a new kind of institution. The factory. The factory. You take making something as efficient as possible. And so you build a building that has machines and every person is assigned a role. And now we're at the point where there are not even any people, the robots do it. But everybody's assigned a role But you don't assign the roles so that they'll live a good life, so that they'll learn something, so that they'll be happy. No, it's to make the factory work as efficiently as possible. So you feed the humans into the machine in order to make the machine as efficient as possible. For what?
To make our daily life.
What's that?
To make our daily life efficient.
To make our day, and for what? So we got all this stuff, but then I go to a job that's meaningless. I spend 40 hours a week doing something meaning. I'm not talking about myself, I'm just saying in the Industrial Revolution, it was much more than 40 hours. It was, 60, 70 hours in a factory being treated like a machine so that you can have cheaper watches, cheaper bottles, cheaper so on. What was the point? Efficiency. But efficiency just means getting something faster, quicker. But what got lost was that it was for getting, like, what was the thing we were trying to get? And remember, it's gone now, but in appearance sweet, in appearance bitter, in appearance hot, in appearance cold. In reality, atoms in the void. The machine, atomism is the philosophy of the machine. The whole universe is just a big machine. And in the Industrial Revolution, it's like we said, all right, we're going to become machines too. And the machine never asks itself, why am I doing this? So in the Industrial Revolution, you have this new kind of society. And I think we're still trying to grapple with what? It's only, it's been a long time, whatever, 140 years? That's not very long in world history. We're still dealing with how in the world are we going to live when all these machines are doing everything and we're serving these machines and so on. And Marxism was the first reply. And there were other 20th century replies, but I don't think we've found the answer yet. I think the answer is in Plato. Okay, so why don't we take our break? So 15 minutes.
Should I close the door?
You have
Oh, yeah,
come
yeah.
still, but I'll begin and ease into it. Hopefully she'll be here in a moment. Okay, so let's start book 2. I think finishing book 2 is a realistic goal for today. So there's a question of why does it continue at all? If the task was investigate justice, well, there's been a lot of investigation of justice. So people have wondered, why does it keep going? But it's answered at the beginning of book 2. Glaucon, who's, remember, Plato's brother, thinks there are shortcomings to the discussion in book 1. He actually says, Socrates, do you want merely to seem to have persuaded us, or do you want to really persuade us? So there's a distinction in the teaching between apparent education and real education. So they feel that something was left unsaid, something was left undone. Turns out a lot. That's why we get books 2 through 10. So among other things, there were assumptions in book 1 that are not going to enter into the discussion that follows. So for example, that justice is a techne. That's not going to appear any longer, because maybe it's not. Or that justice is a virtue. Remember, Thrasymachus thought justice is not a virtue. And yet, Socrates' arguments depended on justice being a virtue. So someone like Thrasymachus won't be persuaded. Do you remember what Thrasymachus thinks justice is? I mean, advantage of the stronger. But when it comes to being a virtue or not, why is it that he doesn't think it's a virtue? If I'm just, what does Thrasymachus think about me? Socrates will say, I'm a virtuous man because I'm just. What will Thrasymachus say about me if I'm just?
Powerful.
Is that?
You are powerful.
If I'm being just, it's not that I am powerful. Just like if I go to church according to Marx, that doesn't make me rich. To simplify, for Marx, the rich invent religion and get the poor to go to church so that the poor will cooperate with the rich. Because the rich can write the texts. They can get the priest to say, you should pay your taxes or God will punish you in hell. So if I'm just, if I'm going along with the code of justice that the powerful produce, what does that say about me? If I'm poor and I pay my taxes to the rich, only because I've been tricked into believing their story about God, what does that say about me?
How about you?
According to Thrasymachus, I'm just giving you Thrasymachus' view. Thrasymachus thinks justice is ideology. It's fake. Its only purpose is to promote the advantage of the stronger. That's why they do it. They're the puppeteers. But if I'm cooperating with them and believing that and giving my money to them because I think it's just, and serving in their wars because I think it's just, and respecting them as my superiors because I think it's just, am I virtuous by being just?
Yeah.
According to Socrates, yes.
Oh, yeah.
But according to Thrasymachus, no.
No, yeah.
What am I? I'm a fool. I've been tricked.
You are lied.
Yes, I was deceived, and I fell for it. I was weak. So the idea that justice is a virtue, Socrates thinks so, but Thrasymachus thinks no, it's just a kind of naive foolishness. So if Thrasymachus is going to be persuaded, the discussion can't assume that. And it's not going to assume this either. So Glaucon and Adimantus, what they're onto is, there were too many assumptions in Book 1. Too many things that people will disagree with. We need to begin with fundamentals. We need to begin from the beginning, where no one will disagree, and then build up an understanding of justice from that. So Glaucon poses a challenge to Socrates. And it's a complicated challenge. It's going to take us maybe half an hour to discuss it. But before we go into the details, I just want you to notice something. Thrasymachus was the main opponent in Book 1. And Socrates defeated him by assuming things that Thrasymachus doesn't agree with. It was a hostile encounter. It was a debate. And Thrasymachus, at a certain point, he realizes, I'm not getting anywhere in this discussion. Socrates won't let me speak the way I want to speak. Nobody's paying me. Nobody's clapping. I'm here for the clapping and for the payment. So he just kind of backs away. And he actually says to Socrates at one point, I'll nod if you want me to nod. He's just going to go along with the show. He's not listening anymore. Do you remember, you can force someone or you can persuade them, but you can't persuade them if they won't listen. So what's needed is speakers, characters who will listen. People who think, Socrates, I think you're right. But what's the point of having a conversation, philosophical conversation, with somebody who thinks you're just entirely right? What's the point?
Conversion.
Well, you're already converted. So Glaucon believes what Socrates believes when it comes to justice. So what does Glaucon need from this conversation? If Socrates thinks justice is a virtue, Glaucon says, yep, I agree completely. If Socrates says justice is a craft, I agree completely. If Socrates says what justice actually is, as we'll see, Glaucon's going to agree. So what could Glaucon get out of this?
Why
Why?
it is false or yeah.
Not why it is false, but why it's true.
Oh yeah.
So Glaucon agrees, but he doesn't know the reason. It's like you could believe in a religion, but not know why it's true. And then you would go to a priest or whatever and say, explain to me, I believe, but tell me why it's true. Give me a deeper understanding of what I already believe. So that's the attitude of Glaucon. And so the conversation completely shifts character. It goes away from being a hostile debate to what you would think of typically as education. Namely, the student is there and wants to learn. and kind of fundamentally agrees with the approach and wants a deeper understanding. And you asked at the very beginning of this course, early dialogue, middle dialogue, late dialogue, and so on. That's one thing that never happens in the so-called early dialogues. The early dialogues are always a conversation with someone who, if they're not hostile, they are at least not agreeable. This is something new. Having a conversation with somebody who agrees with you, who wants a deeper understanding. And you can achieve different things with someone who agrees with you than you can in the other situation. I mean, you all know what it's like to be in a debate versus what it's like to be with a sympathetic person where you're both pursuing the truth together. That's what we have here. So having been dissatisfied with book one, Glaucon has this challenge, and it's got several facets. He wants Socrates to explain what justice is, the what it is of justice. That's strange English. What justice is the more straightforward. But the what it is, I'm kind of training you to think of that as the essence of justice. Tell me the essence of justice. And notice that in book one, there was no mention of like what justice really is. There was a discussion of whether it's a craft, whether it's valuable, whether it's like money making, but we didn't learn what it was. So Glaucon thinks, fundamental failure, you never told us what justice is. That's got to happen. And then tell us what is the value of justice. Having told us what it is, tell us why we should get it. Tell us what the point is. So those are the sort of two things that Glaucon really wants. Now to his challenge, which is going to make those demands very specific. He says, tell us how it began. Tell us how justice arose. Because, he says, people have a view already about how it arose, and we don't want you to tell us that view. That view is the sophist's view. It's just one paragraph. If we had time, we would read it together. But we don't, so I'll just describe it. Imagine we're on a desert island. By the way, stop me anytime you think I'm going too fast.
いや、どの辺でよくわからなくなりましたけど、今まで OK ですか？
Okay.
はい。多分これは簡単だと思われる。
So imagine we're on a desert island. You know, we've shipwrecked. And we don't know how to live together. And let's say there's only this bottle of water. If we were just animals, rats, how would we distribute the water?
I don't know.
You don't know?
We don't know.
We don't know, because we don't know rats. Let's imagine kind of savage beasts. Imagine human beings that have no justice.
Okay.
They won't distribute.
We wouldn't distribute it, but would it just stay there and nobody would drink from it? Who would, okay, well, I'm going to go for it, you're going to go for it, because we all need it to live. There's no water on this desert island. Who's going to drink it? I don't mean which of us, I mean what kind of person is going to get the water?
The strongest one.
What's that?
The strongest one.
The strongest. So if one of us, let's say Yoshi Sensei is the strongest, he would get the water and he would drink it and we would all die. But of course it'll take us, a few days to die. And what is he going to have to do? Let's say it takes you, 3 or 4 days to die of thirst. What's he going to have to do in those 3 or 4 days? That's going to make him weak. Every human being has to do this. We're all very weak. Every 16 hours or so. At least once a day. You might go 2 days without this, but it's very hard to go longer than 2 days without this. Sleeping. So even though he fought us off and he got the water, he has to go to sleep. And when he goes to sleep, then what will happen?
So what?
What will happen? So he's got his cave and he's in there with the bottle, but he's sleeping. What happens next? Do we all stand out here and say, Yoshi Sensei was the strongest, so I guess we're all going to die. He's going to live, but he's sleeping.
Makes sense.
取っていくんじゃない
So Patrick is gonna take that one. Like,
If what? Let's say I am the one. It would be because of what?
you're eager to take water.
Well, we're all eager to take it. We'll all die if we don't get the water. So what would make me the one who gets the water?
Having courage.
I want it, I'm eager, let's say I'm courageous, but I'm just looking for the simple answer that Hiroka gave us earlier. So, let's go back to the beginning. We're shipwrecked, there's only one bottle, we all want it, we all reach for it. Yoshi Sensei beats us all off. He grabs it, and he goes into his cave. And he's in there drinking the water, and we're all dying of thirst. But then, and we keep looking in, and we realize he just fell asleep, okay? Who gets it next?
We're gonna attack him
Yes,
all together.
yes, but when we attack him, let's say we get it, because he's sleeping, we don't even have to attack him, just let him keep sleeping. Are we gonna then say, okay, you have a sip, you have a sip, you have a sip, you have a sip?
Maybe not.
Maybe not. Just use the same logic. Why did Yoshi Sensei get the water in the first place? I'm just looking for the same answer that you gave.
He is the
He's the strongest. And so who's going to get the water when he loses it? The next strongest. And then, so let's say that's me. Well, I have to sleep. And then the next strongest. So, if life is just a battle between the strongest, who wins?
finally no.
Nobody. It seems like he won at first, but he's not so strong that he can keep it. The strongest person is weak to some extent, namely we sleep. And we all have other weaknesses as well. So if we all make that recognition that, hey, wait, we're all going to die if we do it that way, what's another way?
Make a group.
Make a group. Let's say, hey, and nobody touch it. Let's make a rule that everybody gets one sip every 24 hours. And that way we have a chance of surviving as this group for the next 7 days. Rather than all dying in a fight in the first 48 hours.
Sir, I said group, but whatever.
You said what?
Group.
Group, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we would form a group. We would recognize that each man for himself is a destructive strategy, and we would decide, using our reason, better if we make a rule that everybody obeys. And in fact, when you have a rule, it's good to have somebody who enforces the rule, or a team of people who enforce the rule, so that the rule is respected. That would be like the government. And what would the rule be? And I don't mean a sip every 24 hours. I mean, what would we call that rule? If you reached for it, because and tried to have 2 sips, and I would slap your hand and say, no, don't do that because it is, you broke the rule, or it is
Unjust.
unjust. The rule is justice. Justice is the rule or the rules that we make up. They don't exist in reality. We just make them up so that we can all benefit. Because we recognize that if we don't cooperate using justice, it'll be worse for all of us. This is what Glaucon says is what most people think is the origin of justice. And when he says most people, he means Your typical Athenian, your typical Greek of this time, who's been persuaded by the sophists. Because you can see the traces of sophistry there. Justice is not in reality. Justice is an invention. The rules that we happen to make up. And that's why you have some rules in Japan that don't exist in America, and you have some rules in America that don't exist in Japan. You've got nature, which is just atoms and void, there's no justice there. But then human beings who want to live, and perhaps have some pleasure, they make up rules. But there's a lot of arbitrariness, randomness in the way that they make up the rules. This is justice is an invention, or we say in English, a convention. I don't know if you want to, I haven't given you a chance to translate.
No, it's okay. I think convention 日本で言ったら地域
The Greek is nomos.
慣習とかやるんですか。
しきたりじゃないです慣例か慣例いいかも決まりきったこと
Okay. The Greek for reality here is physis, from which in English we get physics. So atoms and void, nature, the way things really are, the harsh reality, versus laws, customs, conventions, rules that we make up. They're not real, they're just appearances. This is called in the West the social contract theory. Is that,
社会契約
you've heard of this? So that term comes from a philosopher named Rousseau. Rousseau is responding to a British, so that's a French philosopher, 18th century, really important for the French Revolution. He's responding to a 17th century philosopher, John Locke. So French Revolution, very important figure in the American Revolution. Whether it's Japan or the United States or France, we live in countries that stem from this tradition. Japan is interesting to me for all kinds of reasons. One is that it seems so Western. It seems like it's so steeped in this tradition, and yet it has these features that are not at all like this tradition. It's sort of as if this Western tradition has been kind of placed on top of something. And I think, obviously, the Second World War had a lot to do with that. The American occupation and said, you know, Douglas MacArthur, I think, said, this is the way it's going to be.
But it isn't just out of theory.
But there was some of that before. Both of these philosophers owe a debt to a British philosopher named Thomas Hobbes, who really describes for the first time in the modern period, when I say modern, I mean after the 15th, 16th century, this theory. So what I'm trying to do is a couple of things. I'm trying to say countries like Japan and the United States, for better or for worse, stem from this theory that starts in the modern period with him. He translated a Greek author, Thucydides, who was a contemporary of Socrates. Thucydides. He wrote a history of the Peloponnesian War. It's one of the great books of all time, still exists, and it's the history of the war between Athens and Sparta that I began describing on our second day. And among the many rhetorical features of this book, he presents speeches by politicians who were trained by these people. So let me summarize why I'm doing this. There were the sophists like Thrasymachus, Protagoras, I mentioned, Gorgias, and so on. They had a worldview that I hope you're becoming familiar with. That worldview shows up in the Peloponnesian War. Thucydides writes a history of that. Hobbes, 2,000 years later, translates that. He adopts this worldview. This worldview then creates, I'll simplify, the modern world. The modern liberal democratic world. If I had to say one source of the thinking of the government, the society of the liberal democracies that we live in, whether it's Japan or the United States, it's the sophists. It's this.
全てはそういう人たちの考えから始まってホーバスからどんどんと受け継がれて現代まで来てますということですよね。
So, for example, when you think about justice, you did this, it was very helpful. You start talking about laws. So I said, remember, I wanted this back. And then you said, well, is there a law? What are the legal concerns? When we think of justice, it's about the rules. Just like on our desert island. If you want to have a second sip, I have to say to the committee that is administering this, what are the rules? Is she allowed a second sip? If somebody, dropped their sip, are they allowed to have a sip? Do we write down a rule for that situation? So justice would be a matter of the rules of the government. Very unlike Cephalus, who is just a rules for business, or Polemarchus, the rule, if you like, for soldiers. Definitely very unlike Socrates, as we'll see eventually. But I need you to notice a feature about these rules. We're on the desert island. You want the water. The rule says you can't have another sip, Kazune. But you want another sip, because we're all so thirsty. Can you take another sip? You can, but what will happen? Anyone can answer. If she takes a second sip, what will happen?
一口といろいろなのに二口目を飲んでしまったとしたらどうなるでしょう?
Punishment. There will be the rule that if somebody takes a second sip, they get, some beating or something, whatever the punishment is. Okay, but we all really want a second sip. So what's the clever person going to realize? How can you get a second sip without being punished?
Change the law.
Well, then everyone would get a second sip and it would disappear fast. You want to get a second sip, but you don't want anyone else to get a second sip. But you don't want to get punished. Now, you're all very good people, so this doesn't come to mind immediately. But imagine you're a bad person. Put justice and morality out of your mind completely and be a sophist and think, it's all an invention anyway. I'm not violating anything in the world. I'm just violating this rule that was just arbitrarily made up. How do I get the second sip without being punished?
Persuade someone to give me your one sip.
Oh, I could? Yeah, that'd be really good. Yeah. Okay, so you're not wrong. You're thinking a step ahead of me. But the problem with that is, yeah, you'd have to be really good to persuade the person, because after all, I mean, we're all going to die if we don't get our sips. So before you try that, what could you try?
Make one
Sip.
sip, louder sip.
How-
The bigger.
Ah,
The
okay.
bigger sip.
Yeah, but we would have a rule about that. In other words, we'd all be watching you.
No, it's fine. Like she was like, she's gonna drink the water
Yeah.
in one stroke,
Okay.
much more huge.
Yeah, well, we would punish her. So, that might be a prudent thing to do to live, but I'm just asking, how would you get a second sip without being punished? It's really interesting to me that you have to think about this, because in America, everyone would know immediately. Let me give you an example. In America, when you're standing on the street and there are no cars coming and it's a red light, you walk across the street. It's called jaywalking. Because you think, I want a second sip, I want to get to the other side now, and I look around, no cops, so I cross. But in Japan, nobody ever crosses, everyone just stands. I was in Tokyo and the street was like from me to you, it was that wide. No, it was in Kyoto. It was about this wide. It was a side street. There were no cars anywhere. And I was standing next to like 3 people, and there were like 4 people on the other side, and there's a red light, and we're all just... It was crazy. To me, it was crazy.
Crazy as well, yeah.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Why do you do it then?
I'm gonna cross.
Oh, you're gonna cross. You're an American at heart.
I don't know, but yeah.
So anyway, what's the answer? If you want a second sip and you don't want to be punished?
Killing others.
You don't have to go that far. You may eventually, but before you get to persuading somebody in the open or killing somebody,
Just have it without being noticed.
just have it without being noticed. Because the rules apply only to what people see. The rules can't apply to what people don't see. I mean, if somebody comes along and says, hey, somebody took 2 sips, if I was a really good thief, I'm not going to get punished. I could say, yeah, somebody took 2 sips, wasn't me. So this system of justice, what's the loophole? What's the problem? I mean, you may think it's fine, but I mean, if the whole point is to get everyone to follow the rules, what's the problem? What does it depend on?
Depend on people's sights.
Yeah, appearances, the way things seem. It's not about the way people are. It's about the way things seem. This is why it's the sophist view of justice. For them, it's all about appearances. If you're Socrates and you think justice is a virtue, well, I could sip a second sip. Nobody's looking. But I believe it would be unjust. So I'm not going to do it because justice is real. Nobody has to see it. I would be violating justice. And I guess I'm just trying to understand culturally, when Japanese are standing and not crossing on the red, is it because they think it would be wrong? Even if no one were looking. Even if you're by yourself at 3 a.m. and there's a road like that and a red light, do you stand there thinking, this is justice? Or do you think, I might get seen? Which one?
Middle one.
Which is which one?
Like getting a scene.
Oh, I might get seen.
Yeah.
Is that the way it is?
I guess so.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know. Maybe some people really think that the rule is a
Yeah,
so
but not
they
many?
have to-
Yeah,
Well, I think, but I'm not sure.
yeah, interesting. Well, anyway, as long as you see the point, which is this origin of justice, it's not what Glaucon believes. It's definitely not what Socrates believes. Glaucon's merely saying, give me an origin of justice that's not this. Because this is all about appearances. I want to know the origin of real justice. And you can see why we need a new speaker, because Thrasymachus wouldn't be interested in real justice. He doesn't think there is such a thing. Okay. Next in this challenge, the Ring of Gyges, one of the most famous stories in the history of philosophy. Does anyone remember this story?
But I'm not.
Oh, I would have. I would have forgotten. I honestly, I would have forgotten. You could have gotten away with that, but they
I'm
would
for
have.
the justice, yeah.
They would remember. Yeah. So Gyges is a shepherd, and there's an earthquake, and there's a chasm, and he goes down into the chasm, and he finds a staircase, and he goes deep down into the earth, and there's a shrine, and in the shrine is a ring. Remember the story now? He puts on the ring. Oh, look at that. You've got your ring. He puts on the ring, and what happens? He's at a meeting of other shepherds, and he puts on the ring. What happens?
He become invisible.
He becomes invisible. He doesn't appear to anybody. He takes off the ring. He's not. He's visible now. He's not invisible. So what does he do? And this is supposed to be a lesson to say, what would you do if you had the ring of invisibility? This is a magical, fanciful story that's just exposing the logic of justice according to the sophists. If justice is all about appearances, and you can put on a ring so you won't appear to anybody, you can do whatever you want. What does Glaucon think most people will do? Well, what did Gyges do? He was sent by the shepherds as an emissary to the king to describe the situation of shepherds, and then when he got in the castle, he put on his ring, and he slept with the queen, and he turned her against the king, and he became king. It's a fable. Even if it weren't so great a crime, the idea is most people in that situation would do what they want, regardless of justice. This doesn't prove anything, but what it suggests is that most people think about justice this way. For most people, it's about, as you were saying, even for the Japanese when it comes to crossing the street, I don't want to be seen. So if you had the ring of invisibility, would you cross the street when it wouldn't matter whether the people are there? Would you just cross? Yeah? So then you're following that rule because you don't want to be seen to be breaking it. You don't care about following it for its own sake. Take any other moral or immoral action, however you think about these things. Start with jaywalking, which is crossing the street when you shouldn't, all the way up to murder. If you'd cross the street, where would you stop doing those things because you think that would be wrong for its own sake? Now we've got people, apparently 5% of the human population, psychopaths. What's the word in Japanese? Okay. They would, with the ring, they would do anything they wanted. In other words, for them, justice is always about how they appear. They don't have any sense of real justice. And in a way, Glaucon's saying, Socrates, tell me they're wrong. I'm playing Glaucon. I believe they're wrong. I believe psychopaths are wrong. I believe there is real justice. I believe it's good and the best life to follow justice even when no one's looking, but I don't know why. Tell me why. Because according to the common account, there's no explanation. This is the big one, so before I proceed to this, are there any questions? Or if you feel like you need to translate anything.
とりあえずこのグラウコンさんの質問の一番のポイントのところは大丈夫ですかね。実際じゃあなんでなんだと、見られてもなくてもしたくてもなぜそのルールを守らなければいけない、もしくはそういう正義というものが存在するのか、なぜなんでしょう。
Another way of putting it is, Glaucon says there are three types of good. Things that are good for their own sake, so pleasure, health, knowledge. If I say to you, do you want to be healthy? And you say yes, and I say why? It's a strange question because we want health for its own sake. Now, it's also good to be healthy for its consequences. You can study better, you can do your job better, you can make more money, etc., etc. Do fun things. So health is good for its own sake and for its consequences, so it's good for both. Pleasure, I'm not going to get into this, but perhaps pleasure is good for its own sake but not for its consequences, and so it's not for both, it's merely for its own sake. Knowledge, that's sort of like health. It's good to know, seems like a valuable thing for its own sake, and you can use it in a techne, so it's good for both. What about going to the dentist? What kind of good is that? Good for its own sake, good for its consequences, or good for both?
歯医者さん、この3つのうちのどれ？
Good for its own sake? Would you choose that if nothing else happened? Your teeth didn't get any better just because it's good to have your teeth drilled? No. So it can't be for both because it can't be for its own sake, so it's got to be for its consequence. You go to the dentist, it's painful, but because good things happen because you did that. Okay? Everyone clear on the differences? Glaucon's question is, his challenge is, Socrates, show us that justice is good for its own sake. I mean, for both, but everybody agrees that it's good for its consequences. That's the sophistic view. If you're just, you seem just, people want to do business with you, they want to go on dates with you, they want to hire you, and so on. It's obviously good for its consequences. But when no one's looking and there are no consequences, is it good for its own sake? Glaucon thinks it is, and he's saying, tell me why. Go ahead.
グラコン分かりますかね。もうその正義というものそのものでOK だとグラコン自身は信じてるんですけども、でも一体それは本当に何でなのか、その結果のためじゃなくってそのものが存在していることっていうのに一体どういう意味があるのか。例えば健康のことであったりとか知識のことであったら分かりやすいですけども、正義っていうものに関してだったらどう言えるでしょう。
Now is the final stage of the challenge. 2 lives, 2 educations. Glaucon is saying this. Socrates, imagine 2 lives. The totally just life and the totally unjust life. What do we mean totally? This man is really just. And this man is really unjust. So that gets at for its own sake. But because this man is totally, well, I'll start here. Because this man is totally unjust, he creates an appearance of justice. He's a murderer and a rapist and a thief and a liar and so on, but he's really good at it. And so people think he's just. In the most extreme case, he might become the leader of the nation, where he can do anything he wants, but then he can create an ideology according to which he's entitled to do those things, because that's what justice is. This would be the totally unjust man. I'll take questions in a moment, let me finish this. This would be somebody who's really just. When no one's looking, he's really just. And he values that justice so much that he doesn't care about how he appears. And he actually appears unjust. The model here is clearly Socrates. According to Plato, Socrates is really just. He does the things that he thinks are best, even when no one's looking. In the cave, he goes down and to help people get out of the cave because he thinks that's what's best. But people don't like being brought out of the cave. They get angry. They get confused first, and then they get angry. Like Thrasymachus, they feel humiliated. Thrasymachus is used to getting people to clap. He's used to getting money. He could become very powerful if he decides to go that route. And here he is being humiliated by Socrates. There's one of my favorite lines in all philosophy. It's too late now, but at a certain point in the conversation, when Socrates says there's no art of money making, and it's clear that from the argument that there can't be, it says Thrasymachus blushed. You noticed it? Yes. Shame. Very powerful. A man like Thrasymachus does not, nobody likes to get ashamed, but a man like Thrasymachus really doesn't like to get ashamed. Because for him, it's all about appearances. And when you're ashamed, you appear the opposite of how you want to appear. He's clearly, I don't know if you have this term in Japanese, a narcissist.
Yeah, as it is.
Yeah.
Narushist.
And if you read book 1 again, you'll see all of his behavior is narcissistic. It's, he wants to win, give me money now, I've humiliated you, you're stupid, you should have a nurse because you're so naive. He's a bully and a narcissist, and those people care a lot about how they seem. So you think about Socrates going around Athens for 30 years and doing that to powerful people, well, they hate him. And they kill him, as I mentioned before. So that's where this unjust appearance comes. They didn't just kill him in the night. They brought him to trial, and a jury of 501 found him guilty of corrupting the youth and being impious. And they executed him. So we've got the life of Socrates and the life of, let's say, Thrasymachus when he becomes the leader. Which is the better life? Glaucon is asking, Socrates, show me that this is the better life. That's a really hard thing to show. Because it's one thing to just show me that justice is good for its own sake. This is now, show me it's so good for its own sake that it's worth it even if you get put to death. Even if the unjust guy gets to become king and rich and marry whomever he wants. So that's the end of Glaucon's challenge. Questions would be good.
ここまで聞いて何か質問が聞かれるということですが、この流れは大丈夫ですか？聞かれていることは。ソクラテスはその正義の人であるということに関して、それを突き進むがために逆に、この洞窟の中の人たちから見られるように、逆に公平じゃない人のように見られてしまうということもあえて引き受けてまでやっぱりその公平さを貫こうとする、最終的にはそれによって殺されてしまうということも起こる、そういうやり方に対してトラシマクスみたいななんていうのか、実際ではそうじゃないんだけども正義である人であるかのように見せかけることで行く末には王様にもなっちゃえるような、っていう話ですが、ここまで聞いてどうですか。
Here's where I'm pausing, because that is the challenge that the entire dialogue is going to try and answer. So, books 2 through 9 are responding to this challenge. It's not until book 9 that you get the response.
Oh, wait.
So that's why I want to get to the end, because you'll feel like we got the question, we never got the answer. But everything that happens in the meantime is necessary to understand what he means when he says what he says in book 9.
このブラウトの質問の意味、本当に見せるところがわからないと、これからの話がこの2巻から9巻にかけてソクラテスが答えていくところがわからないので、その質問、ブラウトの質問の本質が分かっているかどうかということですけど、何か付け足すことありますか？大丈夫そう。 ですか、ここまでいけそう。
We're
We
good?
think
Yeah?
that
They got it?
understood.
Okay. Okay, well, let's begin then. Adimantus is Glaucon's brother. They're both Plato's brother. And Adimantus adds some more to this. We'll just skip it in the interest of time. I'll just tell you what he does without getting into the details. This Ring of Gyges story is a magical fable. Adimantus describes what actual life is in Athens to show that this is true. Now, when I say it's true, there's no ring, but there are ways that you can seem invisible in actual political life. You can become a very good speaker, and you can create a story about yourself that people will believe, that will allow you to get away with crimes, for example. So training with the sophists is like a Ring of Gyges. Or joining secret societies, clubs of powerful men who cooperate in crime with each other in order to control a population and make sure they don't get caught because they control the justice system. So I'm just giving you a sense of what he does. We can skip it for our purposes. But.
ここでいけますかね。この実際に公平な人に見せかけること、その指輪を外したり生けたりっていうのと同じように公平な人に見せかけることっていう方法はまあいろいろあって、その一つの方法としてはスピーチの力を使う、有弁さを使って人々のまあ虜にかけるみたいなことがまあ一つできるし、もしくはまあ秘密結社みたいなところでその水面下でなんかいろいろなやり取りをしてうまく立ち回れるようにするっていうこともできます。まあ、そのようにまあ指輪をはめたりはめなかったりしてそのわからないように公平な人であるよということを見せかけることができる。
Can I go back to the
Sure.
The question that you posed?
Mm-hmm.
I can understand the this graph, like the dichotomy between justice and injustice,
Mm-hmm.
ultimate justice
Yes.
and ultimate injustice. But I feel like I'm questioning. I'm asking this question many times, but I feel like we can't perceive what the justice is in every focal points
Mm-hmm.
again and again. So
Mhm.
I don't know. So your question was like why justice is still important, like in front of the reality
Reality.
where the injustice is going well in the society. But my question is, from the start, I feel like I can't perceive discern the justice with injustice in my daily life.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have two things to say. One is that could be the case. In other words, it might be the case that it's very hard or maybe even impossible to know what to do. But we could still ask this question, and it would be a hypothetical, namely, if there were somebody who had a just soul, even if we can't perceive it, and there were somebody who had an unjust appearance, that's not hard, we know. That's like somebody who gets executed, and vice versa. Then, if someone, Socrates in this case, shows us that this is a better life than this, that's pretty interesting, even if what you're saying is true.
Yeah. What I emphasized about was that even ourselves, even Socrates maybe can't perceive what he is doing right now for the moment.
He's doing what? He can't perceive what he's doing?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's doing he's following justice or he's following an injustice.
Yes.
Even for Socrates, it might be difficult
Yes.
to
Yes.
discern. Yeah.
Yes. Yoshi, do you know this story? You'll know it better than I do if you know it. It's I think it's in Zhuangzi. the Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi? Zhuangzi?
創始かな創始や
You'll recognize the story. The story is of a farmer who has a broken leg. No, he goes horseback riding
なんか
and he breaks his leg.
有名な話だけ
Okay.
ど
You know the story?
全部は覚えてないなんか
I'll keep telling, but if you know it, you can tell it.
いや最後はなんか戦争に行かなくなって自分だけ生き延びたなんかそれなんか
Should I keep telling to make sure?
採用が
So in the
採
end,
用がうまく
違います
ね、多分それだと思う。
知ってますちょっと細かいところまで覚えてない
Yes, okay, that's the story.
それです。その話。
But it's important to do like 3 or 4 stages, not just one stage.
なんかいくつかなんか出来事があって
そのステップを全部言ってほしい。You want them to know that
All the stages.
いけます。Maybe it's better to Google.
Okay. Okay, you know what I'm talking
Quite
about.
a
famous
famous story,
Yes.
but I don't remember each stage.
Yes.
これことわざやからね
優先知らない
これのもともとは
送信
エピソードこれ
中国の
This will, even if it doesn't answer your question, it will help us think about it.
これちょっと出典が創始やないね違うのか
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
4つのステージ出てきました。それが分かったら、それをちょっと日本語で言ってもらえると。
So you know the story.
Like horse escaped.
I know the story. You can read it in Japanese so the others know.
日本語で。
馬が逃げる、馬が戻ってくる、息子の怪我、戦争の勃発で、
これ結構詳しい
あれ中国の物語じゃない
そうですそうですあ説明できます
なんか知ってるよ
ちょっと簡単に説明してください、この4つを。She knows because it is from
チョンツ。
春南子
創始じゃないね順南子とか
うん春南子
中南地。なんか言えますか。
まあこれ読んでくれてここに結構詳しくその人はずっと書いてるからその
採用がこの採用がまだ私の採用とは中国の北辺の砦に住んでいた老人のことを指します。その昔中国の北辺の、砦に占いに長けた老人が住んでいました。ある日そこで飼っていた馬が逃げ出してしまいます。同情した人々に対し老人はこの出来事が不幸を招くかもしれないと言いました。するとそのうち逃げ出した馬が春明を連れて戻ってきたのです。たくさんの春明がやってきたことに人々は喜びますが、老人は今度はこれは災いとなるかもしれないと発言したのです。すると後日、春明に乗っていた老人の息子が落馬して足の骨を折ってしまう事件が発生しました。これも周囲の人たちが憐れみましたが、老人は今度もこれが幸福を呼ぶかもしれないと言います。それから1年後、戦争のために頑丈な男子はすべて兵役に就くことになりましたが、骨折していた老人と息子は徴兵を免れ、親子ともども命拾いをしたというのです。この話の教訓から最後が馬は人生とは何が不幸となるか災いとなるか分からず嘘がつかないことを表すようになった。
That's what I wanted to say.
So
在文诗嘛，对吧？
So it's very hard
文诗嘛，你知道吗？
Yeah, even for
知ってます
Socrates.
よね。
to know
Yeah.
what is best in a circumstance. Can you translate that?
What's the best circumstance? その状況に一番 番
what is best in a circumstance.
その状況において何が一番良いことなのかを知ることは難しい。
This is the view, which this story illustrates. Okay? But there are different things that we can think about this story. One is so hard, it's impossible. Or so hard, we need an education to know.
この2つの説明か。あまりにも難しいのでもうわからない。不可能だ。
What is the right one?
教育をすれば知ることができる。わかる。
Go hard.
So hard, I'm sorry.
So hard.
So
一生
hard.
懸命。
Yeah. For example, it's very hard to know when Miyamoto has a sore belly. It's very hard to know what's going on with him. Is it so hard that it's impossible to know? If we were primitive cave people, it would seem like there's no way we can know. It must be a demon that's in your belly or something.
もしも古代の人たちだったとしたらもうとても何が起こっているのかわからない、もしかしてなんかちょっと悪い虫がいるぐらいのことしか言えないかもしれない。
But since we lived in caves, we've developed medicine, and it is hard to know. We need an X-ray machine, we need 4 years of medical school, but we can find out.
まあその4年間今の時代になったら、それは教育によって知ることができる医学の力によって。
And in the question of the farmer, or in the case of justice, this education would be philosophy. What Socrates is proposing is there is an education, there is a training that does for the soul what medicine does for the body.
薬が体にしてくれるようなことを、この哲学っていうものが私たちの魂、心に与えてくれることができます。教えてくれる。
And maybe he's wrong, but that's his view.
So, what if this case, the smartest doctor and the most clever doctor here, more clever doctor, and I did an annual checkup with you, and then there was a cancer, but it was wrong. Actually, it was something different. Disease, something more serious. That was my fault.
Yes.
Maybe in the future, I'm gonna be educated. Everyone's gonna be educated.
Right.
So for the moment, it's impossible to discern.
Okay.
Is the answer response that Plato or Socrates gonna have?
No, they would say it's very hard, not impossible. And the way you keep away from this view is you become a philosopher. And one thing I want to agree with you about is that this takes a lot of hope. That there's something at the end of the education. And that would be what's really good. Emphasis on the real. Because this is a techne. But it's not a techne like carpentry that deals with wood, a specific thing, or medicine that deals with bodies, or horsemanship that deals with horses. It's, as Yoshi Sensei said, a meta craft. It's the craft of all crafts. It aspires to see all of life. And in order to see all of life, there has to be something that it's after. And Plato calls that the good, the real good. In the allegory of the cave, the sun. Or I suggested you think of it as God. But there is this thing at the end that when you see it, everything else becomes clear.
So, Platonic skepticism
Exactly,
again.
exactly. Academic skepticism, exactly. Yes. Yes.
Looks like a long way to reach it.
Yes. So in book 7, where he describes the education of the philosopher in detail, he thinks you got to be at least 50. In other words, if your education begins when you're 10, 40 years. But
It takes more, yeah.
But I don't want to put the wrong idea in your mind. Those 40 years are not 40 years of sitting in a classroom. He thinks you sit in a classroom until you're 35, and then you spend 15 years in life. He thinks administering a city, having real responsibilities. And he thinks that the lessons that you learned in those 35 years, those 15 years of practical life, the lessons will shine. You'll see them in the world. They won't be abstract lessons on a board. You'll see them in the world. In the end, they're not lessons. They're God.
Even taking 40 or 50 years, maybe
Yeah.
he or she can't reach, I don't know, Son of God or
Yes.
very good, maybe,
Yes.
in the worst case. But it is the academic skepticism.
Yes.
Maybe.
Yes. And it comes down to a hope or a faith. I mean, do you think there are wise people? Because what a wise person is somebody whose judgment is reliable. And Socrates is saying, yeah, there are wise people, and here's how you become one. And I think Plato is proposing Socrates as such a person. But I share your skepticism. Because, as I said, I think on the first day, it's a huge gamble. Because Thrasymachus is saying, follow me, and I'm going to make you rich, respected, and powerful. And look, here are the people I've trained, and they're all rich, powerful, and respected. There's no mystery. And then Socrates is over here, he's poor. People don't respect him. He has no power. He's ugly, which is significant. And he's saying, follow me for 50 years. And I'm going to show you God. That takes a lot of faith. And as I said on the first day in a conversation with you, very much like this, I think someone only takes that gamble if they feel the summons that they've already heard before. In other words, when Socrates speaks, they feel like they're hearing it for at least the second time, as if an old friend is saying, come back home. It's not jumping into the void, it's trying to get back to where you knew you were happy.
And maybe there is something like tact within learners to learn.
Yes.
Maybe, if it's a correct way to say.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That makes sense.
And do you remember the Meno paradox? I forget how I did it with you, but oh yes, I said, can anyone help me find my parapluie? And you just looked at me like, what are you saying? Because I was using a French word. You don't know what a parapluie is. But if I say, can you help me find my umbrella? It's a pretty rare English word, so you got pretty good English if you know what I'm talking about. If I say, help me find my umbrella, well, yeah, give me a minute. It's not under here, because you know what you're looking for. We can only find things if we know what they are already. And Socrates, Plato thinks education is only ever remembering what you already know. So it's not, as I mentioned, it's not a leap of faith into the unknown. It's returning to something that you dimly remember. I wish Tadashi were here because this has got the reincarnation elements. The reason we dimly remember it is because before we were in these bodies, we were with God. And then we come into the world, into bodies, and then we meet someone like Socrates who says, there's this God guy, do you remember? I'm going to simplify. He asks you questions that make you attracted to him. You want something that he has. So it's not a choice. I made it sound like it's a big gamble. Like, should I take the gamble? You can't help it. You hear the summons and you just, you serve. Okay. Are we ready? Now we're at the beginning. We are going to begin Socrates' reply. And so I've, these little 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're not going to get to this probably, but it'll just keep going through book 9. And I've given them different numbers to show they're all part of Socrates' reply. I'll stop doing that eventually, tomorrow or next time, Monday. But anyway, this is the rest of the dialogue is Socrates' reply to this challenge. Okay. All right, well, the basic question is, tell us about the origin of justice. What is it? What's its value? Show us why it's good for its own sake. Show us it's so good for its own sake that even if you get tortured and executed for being just, it's still worth it. He said, well, that's a really hard problem. And notice, the question has been about an individual being just. And so the question was, show me about a soul. I erased it, but Socrates, Thrasymachus, these are two souls, these are two people. Socrates says, and it's really hard to imagine his situation, there's never been psychology at this point. There is, you read the Greek philosophers before Socrates, there's no psychology. There's no investigation of the soul. There were a few comments by Heraclitus here and there, but there's no sustained investigation of the soul. So Socrates is effectively saying, I can't tell you the answers to those questions because there's no such thing as psychology yet. I'm going to have to invent it first. So what he's going to do now is invent psychology. But he thinks that the soul is so, well, it's invisible, it's so mysterious, and so on, that it would be impossible to just jump right in and start talking about the soul. He thinks, let's talk about the city first. Because the city is like a big soul. Now, he's not proving that. He's just saying, let's assume this is true. And after we examine the city, with all the categories and distinctions and ideas that we develop, let's then use those and look at a soul and see if they're there. That'll be the proof, if we see that they're there. So for example, and this is what he does, Hiroka, can you read that?
No.
No. Can you read this?
Yes.
What does it say?
Mikra.
Mikra, which is just Greek for small things. Microscope. Can you read this? Mikra. You see the trick? When you just look at the small, you can't see it. But if you see the big, you have a pattern in your mind. And when you look at the small, you can see it. Because your mind has been trained to see a pattern. He's saying the soul is like the little thing. Too hard, we can't see it. Let's look at the big thing and see it. And find justice in the city and then turn back to the soul and see it. That's just important to remember because we're going to talk about the city for books 2, 3, and 4. And it's not till the middle of book 4 that we're going to turn to the soul. But the whole point is to talk about the soul. Everything about the city is there so that we can talk about the soul. So we want to keep in mind that even when we get absorbed in politics, as we're reading, the purpose is to understand the soul. All the politics to that point is in the service of the psychology. Turns out later on, if we get there, you'll see there's a binary relationship that cities make souls through education. And souls make cities by staffing them, by being officers. So there's a double relationship between the city and the soul, eventually. But for now, we're going to look at the city on its own, and then we're going to apply it back to the soul in book 4. Okay? All right. Characteristic of Plato, he begins with a principle. This is not his name. I named it this. Principle of specialization. And the only reason I'm giving it a name, I only do this 2 more times in the whole Republic, is that this is just so important for everything that follows. As I said to Tashida, was his name? The professor who was here? Tadashi. As I said to him, we philosophers, we know, be very careful at the beginning, because the most important moves are the first move or 2, because that determines everything else that happens. And philosophers they're like magicians often. They kind of trick you into accepting something at first, and then you have to accept all kinds of things.
この哲学的なことを話すときにはもう一番最初の一歩が大事だと。ここの一歩を間違えたら後がわからなくなるので、最初の一歩をまず丁寧に。
Okay. So that's why I've given this the name, the principle of specialization. Each should do what he's most suited for, or she. I could just say it. Doesn't have to be about men or women. We're going to talk about politics and economics in a second, but I want you to see it's very general. What should we do with this? Should we hit people over the head with it? No. What should we do, according to this principle, with it?
Keeping water.
I should keep water in it, and I should keep water to drink. And, I mean, in the case of this, there's nothing wrong with using this, I need a door stop, so I'm going to use it as a door stop. Well, it works okay as a door stop, but only okay. It would be better if I had something that was specialized for stopping doors. He's then applying that to economic life. Economics. What is it in Japanese?
経済の領域。
Okay. Oikos. House. Economics is the science of how to manage your house.
家計をどのようにやりくりするか。
Originally, it was for, the slave owner who has a plantation, basically, of olive trees and so on, how to manage the slaves, how to manage production, how to manage your finances, and so on. And you can see how it gets its modern sense, how to manage an entire nation. Okay. Well, that's what the reason I'm saying this is that we're going to start very small. We're going to build a city out of scratch. We're going to do economics starting with the house, with the principle that each should do what it's most suited for. All right, what are the basics of human life?
Breathe. Live.
Okay, well, you're right. Well, okay, we'll do that. What else? The reason why I'm laughing is that we don't need anyone to make breathing for us. It's free. For now. I mean, I'm sure eventually they'll charge us, but for now it's free.
Eating.
Okay, so eating.
Clothes.
Okay. House. Drinking. this is going to seem silly, but shoes. The reason why I add that is because the craft of making clothes is different from the craft of making shoes. Because to make clothes, you work with sheep's wool, whereas to make shoes, you work with cow hide, leather. So you're building a city from scratch. You need to have shoes, house, clothing, water, food, and breathing. Well, there's no craft of getting water, there's no craft of breathing, but there is a craft of eating. And remember, this is very basic. Here the craft is not how to prepare the food in a fancy way, it's just how to get the food. So what is that craft?
Agriculture.
Yes, so farming and weaving and carpentry and shoemaking. Probably never heard this word, cobbler. I love this English word. It's an old, somebody who specializes in making shoes. Where I live, in Pittsburgh, in the United States, when I moved there 20 years ago, it was an old-fashioned town in some way. When I say old-fashioned, it was still stuck in the 1970s. And there was a cobbler at the end of my street. So I would take my shoes in and he would fix them, and I had the same pair of shoes for 20 years.
Wow.
And he would shine them, they always looked new, but he eventually had to quit and take a desk job at the university in administration for financial reasons. But the reason he had to do that was because he said, nobody brings me shoes anymore because you buy cheap shoes at the department store and you just get new ones. Nobody keeps the same pair of shoes for 20 years anymore. Which gets to our earlier point about industrialization and efficiency. At any rate, these are the basic crafts that you need to function, just to live. And the question now is, should we have, a family?
I think you might use this one.
Oh, it's getting so weak, yeah. Oh, the red one's best. Should we have a family of 4 or 5 people where everybody does everything? Should one of us farm from 8 in the morning till 10 in the morning, and then that person, I'll just take Shunya, he starts in the morning, he farms, then he weaves for a while, and then he has lunch, then he does some carpentry, then he makes some shoes into the evening, then we have dinner. And Yoko does the opposite. She starts in the morning and makes some shoes and so on. What would be the better society, that one, or the society in which Yoko specializes in shoemaking and she just does shoes all day long, and Shunya does farming all day long, and Liu does weaving all day long, and you do carpentry? Which is the more efficient society?
Specialization.
The specialized one. That's Socrates' argument for the principle of specialization. He thinks, ironically, it's an efficiency argument for what will help us live. The thing is, it doesn't stop there. People like Marx stop there. But at any rate, and I should say, by the way, Marx has this passage, I'm forgetting, it's one of the earlier manuscripts, where he says the ideal life would be to fish in the morning, to farm in the afternoon, and to criticize literature in the evening. So he thinks no specialization. And it's a reaction against industrialization. At any rate, Socrates is arguing everyone should do the task for which she's suited. And it's not just that you're going to make shoes, as I recall, and Shunya's going to farm, and Miyamoto's going to make tables, and Yu's going to weave, but that you would have started this, Yoko, because you had a natural talent for shoes. You're suited for it, just as you're naturally talented for farming, in the ideal case. So everybody's doing the job that they're suited for, and then we all do the best work, and we share these things, and we live happily. Socrates thinks that is the healthy city. Now, he doesn't stop there, so I should be careful. He says, well, you know, we're going to need other things. I'm trying to remember all of the things. We're going to need retailers. We're going to need merchants. We're going to need shepherds, and so on. But it's a short list of crafts or expertises that you need to have a functioning city. Maybe, do you want to summarize at that point?
まあこれらこの町を成り立たせるためのいくつかの必要な仕事であり、その仕事をする人たちですよね。
I wanted to ask you earlier, because I was already reading this part.
Yes.
You mentioned that the business and what was that?
Political science.
Business, yeah, political
public
science.
relations.
There was not the expertise, technique
Yes.
from Socrates' perspective.
Yes.
Well, is a merchant
Yeah.
technician?
No, that's a good point. Yeah, they're just going to be. He clearly doesn't have much respect for them. He says, for example, you know, so you've got several households. You've got household 1, household 2. You know, let's say you've got 20 households, and they make up a town.
Mm.
Polis in Greek, from which we get political. This house is producing shoes. This house might be specializing in producing farming, and so now we trade. But there's a problem because if you're a farmer, you're very busy during the daylight hours. How are you going to trade with the other people? Well, in the evening, you go to the marketplace. Even if the shoemaker from house number 20 is not there in the evening because, let's say, she makes shoes at night, their retailer will be there to buy the produce from you and put that in a stall and buy the shoes from her, and then you can use the money. The reason I bring this up is he says, these are going to be weak people, not that intelligent, because these people need to have a real craft, and these people just sit around in a stall changing money, selling things. So you make a very good point that I think he doesn't think it's a real craft, but it's somehow going to be necessary for the city. Merchants, he has in mind for merchants, people who get in a boat and take the stuff to another country and bring it back. So you're going to have sailors as well. And you're going to have wage earners. This is funny. Well, it's not funny at all, but it's interesting. Think about pre-industrial economies. Think about, I assume, Japan in the 18th century, just like America in the 18th century. Everybody did something like this. So, for example, most people were farmers. They had a farm that was theirs or that they rented. It was theirs in some sense, and they worked it, and they got the stuff from it, and they sold the stuff, and they used that money to buy other things. No boss. So too for all the other crafts. People used to be much more independent than they are now, because people used to be their own bosses. And we've completely lost this. It's like disappeared from our awareness, because, here's how you can see it. Plato says, well, they're also going to be wage earners, which is to say, people who don't own anything. They don't have land, they don't have a, what's it called, in Japanese even, I forget the English. When you're weaving and there's that thing that spins and you put, you know, women are pumping it and weaving. In English, the distaff, the mill. At any rate, you know what I'm talking about. Okay.
Spinning.
The carpenter has his tools, and he uses his tools to make things. He buys the wood, he fixes it into a table, then he sells the table, and so on for all the others. Wage earners don't own anything. They go to somebody else and say, do you need a worker? Like, for example, let's say there's a carpentry shop. A wage earner could go, or no, better example would be a farmer. It's the harvest time. The farmer needs lots of help on the farm, so he hires, I'm going to pay you 1,000 yen per day to, cultivate the rice, to pick it or whatever you do with the rice. You don't own a farm, you don't have any skills, you're just a body that accepts money for a service. And when he brings these people up, he brings them up as, well, we'll also have to have those too. But have you noticed in our economies, our modern economies, we're almost all wage earners. I go to my university and I teach, and then they give me money for the service that I do. I don't own my own school where people come and then I could make it very different from these kinds of universities. When I teach, I have to go to the university that's owned by somebody else, and I have to conform to what he's telling me to do, and I get money from him, and I better not disagree with him because then he'll fire me. There was this idea in America in the 18th century, when the country was founded, that wage earners should not be able to vote. In America, only people who had land could vote. And the idea was, if you're a wage earner, you're not free, because you have to cooperate with your boss. And it's so weird for us to read that, because now we're all wage earners. And we're all very, very conformist in ways that we don't even recognize. Okay, I've only got 2 minutes, but I want to make 1 or 2 more points so that we got to a certain point. Glaucon and Adimantus, these are aristocrats. They're wealthy. Plato's from a rich family. They own a lot of land.
貴族たちです。
I'll just say as a side note, they owned a field, a huge field outside of Athens. Academe. That was the name of the field, just like you might call the field, Iwakura. He built a school in the field that was called Academe, from which we get the name academic. It's all back to Plato. At any rate, he's from a rich family, and these aristocrats, they're used to fine dining, art, performances by flutes. I don't know if you noticed some of the flute. There's a lot of mention of flutes in Book 3 especially. The finer things in life. And they look at this city, and I think it's Adimantus who says, this is a city fit for pigs. Socrates is proposing it as the healthy city. This is the best city. But the aristocrats look and say, this is for peasants. And Socrates says, oh, you want a feverish city, not a healthy city. Fine then. We're going to add cooks. Our merchants are going to have to go and get spices. We're going to need a navy to defend the ships. We're going to have artists, musicians. I'll say courtesans, but the word would be geisha. In Japanese, there's the one word that I know. and on and on. Those are the things that the aristocrats want. And Socrates says, fine, you can have your feverish city. But, he says, do you realize what will be required to have a feverish city? What's his answer? Well, you need these things, but in order to have these things, what do you need? Because you're not just going to be eating rice. You're going to be eating the finest sushi with the rice that somebody who's trained how to make the best sushi makes. And you're going to have the finest salmon. Notice there are no fishers. Now you're going to have fisheries. I told you we would talk about fisheries. I mean, it's going to go on. What do you need in order to have those things? Remember where we started. We started with just a few families.
Community.
Well, I mean, you've got a community. You had a community here, you've got a community here. But it's a certain kind of community. let me make it obvious. Salmon don't swim in the territory of your city, so you've got to go and get the salmon from a neighboring city's water. Are they going to be fine with that? Hey, yeah, sure, take our salmon. But if you give them a lot of what?
What you need, like
And what is negotiation?
Negotiation, and what will you offer? Money. You need a lot of money. And if they won't give it to you for money, you're going to have to seize it. So what are you going to need?
Army.
You need an army. You're going to need a lot of money and a lot of territory to pull this off. And in order to get that, you need an army. Not only to acquire that, but also to defend it. Because if you become a prosperous nation, your neighbors are going to become envious and they're going to want to take your things. So you need an army. So we have all these crafts that are concerned with just living, and perhaps living in a fine way. But now we need another craft, the soldier. And I'll just speak because I'm out of time. You need a soldier because of the principle of specialization. You can't have a weaver just take up a sword and win a battle. You can't have a carpenter just beat his screwdriver into a sword and win. You need the samurai. You need a special class of people who are trained in war, according to this principle of specialization. Let me just say one more thing, and I'm sorry I kept you over. There's a serious problem if you have a separate army. They'll only be good if they're very aggressive. You want your soldiers to be very aggressive. What's the problem with having within your city a group of very aggressive men?
there's gonna be revolution by them.
Yeah, what if they don't obey your commands? Or what if they start attacking your own people? So this thing that the fever city requires creates a new problem. The problem of aggression. And what you want is somehow to get those people to attack the enemies of the state, but to benefit people within the state. You want them to harm the enemies and benefit the friends. Does that sound familiar? Polemarchus' definition of justice. Remember I said he was a soldier, he had a soldier's mentality? Socrates thinks that is true for soldiers. Justice for them is benefiting the city and harming the city's enemies. One last question. How do you get spirited men to only attack the enemies and always benefit the friends? How do you get them to make that difference and obey that difference? I'll give you a hint. He says these people are like dogs. You can have a very aggressive dog, like a German Shepherd. Very good at attacking enemies, and it's very loyal to friends. But how do you get it to be that way?
Becoming a hero, you know.
Well, the dog might have that nature, but if you just let the dog loose with nothing, it's not going to distinguish properly between friends and enemies.
Train.
You need to train the dog. So what do the soldiers need if they're going to function in this new city? Education. And the rest of the book, until book 7, is about the education of the soldiers. So you're going to read a lot about education. Just remember, it's not the education of most people in the city. Most people in the city are going to get technical education. Only the soldiers will get what we are going to be reading about, which you can think of as like college level, university level education. Okay, sorry to keep you over. So book 3 for next time. Yeah, we'll see. We might have to change our ambitions.